Well, just to tell you that joining us in the studio, Conservative MP for North Swindon and a former Deputy Chairman, no less, of the Conservative Party, Justin Tomlinson, welcome, and also Labour MP for Birmingham Perry Barr, Khalid Mahmood. Welcome to you as well. Thanks for being with us. First of all, we have to reveal, Justin, that you are one of the usual suspects. I don't know if that's the right phrase. Or unusual suspects.
I'm not renowned for my rebellion.
Because, I mean, online wind farms,
yes.
One of the issues that the Prime Minister is having some local difficulty with. And you're signatory to one of these amendments?
Yes, to Simon Clarke's amendment. And I mean, to be fair, I don't see this as being contentious because, in effect, what Simon is arguing for is we allow for local decision-making. The whole principle of government is to try and devolve, empower local communities to make those decisions. And I'm relaxed if a community does or doesn't support them. But at times, with challenging energy bills, we have to explore every single option. It's my same position when we were looking at fracking. And therefore, I was happy to support that amendment because I think we should allow local communities to have the final say.
Right. And, of course, Labour, particularly Ed Miliband, pushing very heavily for the green energy and, in particular, wind power.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the best way to go, both in terms of British industry and in terms of getting new energy from non-fossil fuels, which is an absolutely fantastic thing to do. We've got the resources to do it. Let's get on with it and do it.
The question is, of course, from all these people, would you actually accept a whopping great turbine, a thing going round and round outside, or in a very pretty part of the United Kingdom, even though the wind might be sort of coming up the valley?
Well, I think, look, what we've got to look at, and I think it's important for us to look at local decisions in terms of that. But I think there's lots of places we can put them and have some reality about the way we deal with this and take into account the people in the communities that live in those areas. That's what all planning is about, and we need to be sure of that to give that right, as I agree, in terms of local communities.
The problem, however, for the Tories is that local decision-making is also coming into account on house building and what's built and where. And again, this is another difficulty for Rishi Sunak. Yeah,
and he's got to get a grips with it because if one of the core drivers that attracted me to politics was around social mobility, and a key part of that is that ability to have a home ownership within grasp of all generations, and it's simply becoming more and more expensive for younger people. I represent a constituency which has been pretty much year on year one of the fastest growing towns in Swindon. We work with developers. There is cross-party support for the local plan for good sustainable development. We do need targets to focus minds. We can't have swathes of the country opting out of building houses. We've got to, again, make sure we
However, I mean, you will know many Tory MPs in the Shires, and particularly in the Green Belt, saying, you know, housing should not be built yet. Use the existing brownfield areas and so on.
Well, of course, everybody always looks towards brownfield, but that's only part of the mix. These are often very complex sites to bring online, and all governments of all persuasions have tried to do that. But it's about getting that balance. But we have to have targets to focus minds. Otherwise, we will continue to fail the next generation by not building enough houses.
Right, OK. Talking of targets, 10,000 was once mentioned as the target for migrants coming across, particularly with the boats and so on. Mark White is updating us today. I think the latest figures suggest 43,500 this year. We've now got a letter with David Davis and others pressing the government. Where do you stand on that particular issue?
Well, I mean, my inbox, this is the issue that's being brought up probably the most from people who are concerned that the balance isn't right. Now, there's three strands to this. First, where there are genuine needs for asylum, we have to be compassionate. We have to have a much better, much quicker system. I think all MPs would agree on that. But in terms of economic migration seeking to bypass the rules, we've got to tackle it at every part of the route, and we've got to remove that deterrent. We are starting to see the government get organised on this, but the public will be expecting actions as well as announcements.
Kemi Badenoch there at the dispatch box, who I think you were supporting for Labour, the Tory leadership.
Yeah, she's a great talent, and I'm delighted that she's now part of that top team.
Right.
She's got that extra bit of magic in terms of her ability to engage with people. And, you know, now Boris Johnson's no longer the Prime Minister. We need those charismatic politicians to engage with the public.
Charismatic politicians, Keir Starmer. I mean, he's been very legalistic at the dispatch box at PMQs attacking, but there still is criticism. He's a bit dull, he's a bit boring.
He's been very clinical, and he's proving to be right. He's proving to get to Sunak straight through with asking pinpoint questions and not getting the answers, and people are beginning to see that, and that's where his skills lies, and that's what it's about, being upfront, honest, and delivering the punch as he does regularly.
And the migrant issue, fertile ground again, you think, for him today?
Yeah, but the Home Secretary hasn't turned up to 4 urgent questions. Why is she hiding? Where is she? That's the question, that she's not prepared herself to put herself forward on the policies that she's trying to put forward, allegedly. She has no issue in what's going on. We've got people now going through the country with all sorts of tropical diseases and all sorts of things that we've not faced. Diphtheria is one of them. They have no control, and she has not looked at this seriously. All she wants to do is play as hard as she possibly can to the cameras, but not deliver anything.
But still the question for Labour, what would you do to tackle this issue? How would you put some kind of barrier in place, either in France or here, to stop the boats?
The simple thing in all of this is having safe routes, which we don't have at the moment. Tim Lawton exposed that to the Home Secretary last week, and that is the clear way around this. Have safe routes, deal with 75% of the people that are coming through at the moment through those who are granted asylum when they come here. Deal with that, and you'll do with most of that trade, and you need to get onto site and deal with it in France.
The suggestion is that those coming across the boats aren't trying to seek asylum. They are economic migrants, or even those trafficked.
Majority of 75% of the people that are coming over, Mark, are proper asylums, and that's been proven, and that's what we're saying.
They're told to say when they're coming here.
No, those are the figures that have been issued in terms of those who stay here after they come through.
OK, and what should be done, in Labour's view, for the processing, which is why we've had so many people in Manson, for instance?
Well, look, once you cut those numbers down, when you give them safe routes, you've got lesser numbers coming through in terms of processing. But we should have the capacity, rather than spending hundreds of millions of pounds, which we've done in Rwanda, and putting people there. Let's bring that money back here and concentrate the resources that we have and deliver those.
OK. Why has the Home Office decided to abandon what was called the pushback scheme? We had Robert Jenrick indicating that no longer will the boats physically be stopped from coming across.
Well, we've also got to think about people's safety. About 50% of those boats are intercepted. We have to do much better, which is why it's key that at every strand, that includes working with France at the point where they're seeking to cross the channel, during crossing the channel, once they come here. But it's frankly laughable to listen to what is being said by my colleague, because Labour voted against the National Borders Bill. Labour support the actions that are trying to disrupt our Rwandan plans to have a different processing centre through the courts. We have to provide the strongest possible deterrent to those who are seeking economic migration, and it isn't 75%. That is, as you rightly highlighted, is where people are being told what they have to say to try and bypass the rules, and it's dealing with those seeking to break the rules. But where people are in genuine need, we must improve and have a more compassionate...
But is it the case that you've had to abandon the pushback scheme because, as the French said, it actually breaks international maritime law? You were breaking the law by that policy.
And the whole nub of this, and Albania has been a big case highlighted this week, is we have to have those legal agreements so that we can legally send people back who do not qualify. Right. So you have to tighten the rules, you have to break the criminal gangs' a grip on this, because they are both putting people at risk during the crossings and then moving people into the grey economy, where we often see some of the most appalling cases of human trafficking. And that's one of the things I welcome, how we're going to step up clamping down on those exploiting people who have then made it into this country. OK, Michael Fabricant on his feet. The Prime Minister is in the chamber. We shall go there fairly shortly, but very quickly, Khalid, strikes, winter of discontent. Where are you on that?
Look, at the end of the day, I support the workers when they've got to a stage under legislation, having the proper ballot to then to be able to strike. We shouldn't get to that. What we need to do is the train companies and other people in the health service to be able to negotiate locally and deal with them, and the government overall coming in and give guidance to people to be able to work, and so they can earn a decent living.
Right, decent living. That's the problem, because as minister after minister keeps saying, we can't afford what you're asking for. And given the fact that inflation is running 10%, 12% in terms of food, no one's going to be able to afford a 12% pay.
I think there's a figure you can negotiate. A best trade unionists will always negotiate, and that's what they want to do. Let's sit them at the table, negotiate, not just for now, but also for the future.
And is it that the government is not allowing the train companies in particular to negotiate, the Rail Advisory Group?
Well, one of the key points along those strikes is not breaking that link between the independent pay bodies, because they are proper independent structures that look at both inflation, retention, recruitment, and it's then striking that balance, because if we start cherry-picking different sectors, you get into, any government will get themselves into a very difficult position. Look, we understand cost of living pressures, but in part, we're making sure that people are supported through things like the energy support schemes as we navigate what we hope would be short-term pressures. Right. But it have to respect the work of the independent pay bodies. OK, and Steve Barclay indicating that on that, NHS workers getting at least £1,400, those on lower salaries getting up to 9.3%, i.e. what the independent pay review body is. Anyway, Lindsay Holland's speech on his feet, and I think we're about to start Prime Minister's questions. Gentlemen, for the moment, thank you.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure colleagues from around the House will want to join me in congratulating England on last night. Commending Wales for inspiring millions, and also wishing everyone a happy St Andrew's Day. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with Ministerial. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Tommy Shepherd.
In 2014, his predecessor David Cameron signed up to the Smith Commission, which promised, amongst other things, that nothing in its report would prevent Scotland becoming an independent country should the people of Scotland so choose. Can I ask the Prime Minister, does he share that view? And if he does, and in light of last week's Supreme Court judgment, will he bring forward legislation to allow that choice to be exercised?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, we did have that conversation not so many years ago. It was described as a once-in-a-generation referendum. But and we discussed this last week. I think what the people of Scotland want is for us to be working constructively together to focus on their priorities. That's indeed what we're doing in his own area, investing hundreds of millions of pounds in a growth deal and ensuring that with a new concert hall we can enshrine Edinburgh's reputation as a city of culture.
Sir Paul Beresford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've just returned from the South Pacific and I found there a deep... I've resisted the All Black jokes, Mr Speaker, but I found there a deep concern at the expanding tentacles of communist China. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that China is more than just, as he put it, a systemic challenge, but in fact an expanding, serious geopolitical threat?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, China is indeed a country with fundamentally different values to ours and an authoritarian leadership intent on reshaping the international order, but actions speak louder than words, and that's why we passed the new National Security and Investment Act. Just recently, we used that act to block the sale of Newport Wafer Fab. And this week, with our announcement of Sizewell C, we ensured that China's state-owned Nuclear Energy Corporation will no longer be a part of the project. This government making sure that we protect our country's security.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I join the Prime Minister in saying, well done, England. And I hope we can say that next week and the week after. Commiserations to Wales, so I'm sure we'll be back in the World Cup tournament before too long. And of course, Mr Speaker, we mark that tomorrow is World AIDS Day. Mr Speaker, Winchester College has a rowing club, a rifle club, an extensive art collection. They charge over £45,000 a year in fees. Why did he hand them nearly £6 million of taxpayers' money this year in what his Levelling Up Secretary calls egregious state support?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased he wants to talk about schools, because we recently announced billions more funding for our schools. We're helping millions of the most disadvantaged children catch up with their lost learning. And we're driving up school standards, Mr Speaker. But during COVID, he wanted to keep schools closed. We shouldn't be surprised, because I listen to parents and he listens to his union paymasters.
Mr. Speaker, his Levelling Up Secretary, I see him down there, who, after all, was Education Secretary for 4 years, said you could scarcely find a better way of ending burning injustices than scrapping these handouts. And here's one. He talks about driving up standards. Just down the road in Southampton, and he'll know this, 4 in every 10 pupils fail their English or Maths GCSE this year. 4 in 10. Is that £6 million of taxpayers' money better spent on rifle ranges in Winchester or driving up standards in Southampton?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about school standards. It's under a Conservative government, and thanks to the reforms of the former Education Secretary, that now almost 90% of schools are good or outstanding. But Mr. Speaker, whenever he attacks me about where I went to school, he is attacking the hard-working aspiration of millions of people in this country. He's attacking people like my parents, Mr. Speaker. This is a country that believes in opportunity, not resentment. He doesn't understand that, and that's why he's not fit to lead.
Mr. Speaker, if he thinks the route to better education in this country is tax breaks for private schools in the hope they might hand some of that down to state school, that's laughable. Trickle-down education is nonsense. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just the Levelling Up Secretary. His Education Minister sitting there asks, how much better would it be if Conservatives got rid of these handouts? He talks about his record. It's simple. He can carry on being pushed around by the lobbyists, giving away £1.7 billion to private schools every year, or we can put that money to good use. In the Tory scandal, he talks about his record. Hundreds of thousands of children leaving school without the qualifications that they need. I've made my choice. What's his?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're improving school standards for every pupil in this country. It's our reforms that are leading to us marching up the PISA league tables for reading, for writing, more good and outstanding schools, more investment in every single school. But he talks about choice. This is about supporting aspiration, Mr. Speaker, and that's what this government is proud to do.
Mr. Speaker, he really does need to get out more. And he talks about aspiration. Mr. Speaker, they are killing off aspiration in this country, and it's not just education. Why is the dream of home ownership far more remote now than it was when his party came into power 12 years ago?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what have we done in those 12 years? The highest number of new homes started in 15 years. Largest number of first-time buyers in 20 years. He talked about 10 years ago. What do we inherit? The lowest level of house building in a century.
Mr. Speaker, would you believe it? Mr. Speaker, the simple fact is this. Every year, the age at which people can buy their first home goes up. At this rate, under this government, a child born in the UK today wouldn't be able to buy their first home until they're 45. Now, I love my kids, but I don't want to cook them dinner in 30 years' time. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've heard he's having a relaunch. Apparently, it's called Operation Get Tough. So how tough is he going to get with his backbenchers who are blocking the new homes this country so badly needs?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering record numbers of new homes under this government. That's what we're doing. He talks about toughness, Mr. Speaker. He's too weak to stop dozens of his own MPs joining the picket lines. So what, if he wants to support those hard-working families and show some leadership, why doesn't he confirm right now that no Labour MPs are going to join those picket lines?
Mr. Mr. Speaker, whichever way you slice it, it's always the same. Whether it's private schools, oil giants, or those who don't pay their taxes here, every week he hands out cash to those that don't need it. Every week he gets pushed around, and every week he gets weaker. But I can help him with this one. He doesn't need to do another grubby deal. If he wants to defeat that amendment from his anti-growth backbenchers on national targets for housing, Labour will lend him the votes to do so. Country before party, that's the Labour way. Why doesn't he try it?
Mr. Speaker, I think we did hear too weak to confirm, no one on the picket line. But Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Labour ideas: more debt, more inflation, more strikes, and more migration. He tells his party what they want to hear. I'll take the difficult decisions for this country, and that's the choice, Mr. Speaker. It's the politics of yesterday with him, or the future of the country with me.
As host of this week's International PSVI conference, the UK again highlighted the need for more action to prevent sexual violence in conflict. With heart-rending accounts of women in Ukraine being brutalised in this way, and reports that a third of women in conflict zones can be victims, will the Prime Minister champion with me as his Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief the work being undertaken with young people across the world to prevent religion or belief being weaponised, which can later manifest into sexual violence in conflict?
Prime Minister.
I'm incredibly grateful to my honourable friend for her dedicated work in this area. And she's absolutely right to highlight that this week the UK hosted the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative Conference. It was an incredible success. I pay tribute to all those involved, and as she said, we managed to reach a new political declaration in the conference where over 50 different countries have agreed to put an end to sexual violence in conflict, and she deserves praise for all her work in this area.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in sending prayers and condolences to the wife of Doddy Weir, who sadly passed away at the weekend. The absolute giant of a man, an inspirational figure in Scottish rugby, and someone who raised £8 million for M&D charities over the course of the last 6 years. Our thoughts and prayers are with Cathy, with Hamish, with Angus and with Ben. Mr. Speaker, let me wish everyone a happy St Andrew's Day. And those that know anything about St Andrew know that he's not just the patron of Scotland, he's celebrated right across Europe. That is why it is such a sad sight to watch this Prime Minister rammed through a bill that would rip up 4,000 pieces of European law. Laws that protect workers' rights, food standards and environmental protections. And it's an even worse sight watching the leader of the Labour Party desperately trying to out-Brexit the Prime Minister. Ruling out freedom of movement and any hope of a Swiss-style deal. Brexit is now the elephant in the room that neither the Tories or Labour are willing to confront. When will the Prime Minister finally see reality and admit that Brexit is a significant long-term cause of the UK economic crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I start by joining my honourable friend in offering our condolences to the family and friends of Doddy Weir, and I'd also like to pay tribute to him for his campaign to raise awareness of MND, which has made a big difference. Now, Mr. Speaker, straightforwardly, I was proud to support Brexit. It was the right thing for this country. It allows us to, first of all, get control of our borders, which is incredibly important, and reduce migration, all of which, Mr. Speaker, I noticed what he said, and I agree with him, actually, about the slight dexterity of the Leader of the Opposition on these topics of free movement. And I know he'll join me in reminding the Leader of Opposition about his previous promise to defend free movement of people, not something that we support, Mr. Speaker, but we're also seizing the economic opportunities, deregulating and signing trade deals around the world. That's how we'll drive growth and prosperity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for his remarks on Doddy Weir, but once again, what we're seeing over Brexit is better together. We're used to that in Scotland. The problem for both the Prime Minister and the Labour leader is that when it comes to Brexit, even their own voters don't agree with them. The last YouGov poll showed that a record 56% now believe it was wrong to leave the European Union, and that figure is 71% in Scotland. 1 in 5 who actually voted for Brexit have now changed their minds. More and more people across these islands are wise to the fact that "make Brexit work" is just another stupid slogan. But Scotland can't be stuck with a new Brexit Together coalition of the Tories and Labour. So on this St Andrew's Day, can the Prime Minister finally tell people in Scotland the democratic path to escape Westminster control, to deliver independence so we can get back to the European Union?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about democracy and votes. I think the difference between him and I is that I respect the result of referendums. He talks about this. Just remember one thing, Mr. Speaker. We had the fastest vaccine rollout in the world. We had that because of our freedoms after leaving the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, manufacturing remains a key part of the UK economy, and for the West Midlands, that means automotive. That's important in my constituency of Rugby, which includes firms in the supply chain and workers at Jaguar Land Rover. With the move to all new cars sold in the UK to become electric by 2030, means that it is critical for us to have a site for battery manufacture. Assembly is already taking place elsewhere in the world where batteries are made. So will the Prime Minister give his support to the bid for a gigafactory in Coventry?
Prime Minister.
I pay tribute to my honourable friend's efforts to progress this project. We're fully committed, Mr. Speaker, to securing investment to grow our electric vehicle supply chain. Now, although he'll know I can't comment on individual commercial negotiations, we did announce in the Net Zero Strategy £350 million of funding in the Automotive Transformation Fund to support the development of that supply chain, and I wish him every success in his bid.
Colin Eastwood.
Yesterday, BBC Northern Ireland announced cuts to programming and jobs at BBC Radio Foyle that, in my view, will leave the station totally unsustainable. The BBC Charter places an obligation on that organisation to allow audiences to fully engage on local issues. This decision, in my view, is a very clear breach of that obligation, leaving licence fee payers outside the Greater Belfast area without proper local programming. Will the Prime Minister act to defend this very important local public broadcasting service?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe very strongly in local public broadcasting, and indeed the government has taken steps to support local media. I'll be very happy to look at the specific issue he raises and bring it up with the BBC when I next see them.
Angela Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Guildford tell me they want women and girls to feel safe, and I'm delighted to have had some successes in getting lights turned back on, including on York East Bridge on behalf of concerned students at the University of Surrey. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that even in difficult times we cannot take a single step back from the brilliant work this Conservative government is doing to tackle violence against women and girls?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, like my honourable friend, the government is committed to tackling violence against women and girls and making our streets safer. We've created the Safer Streets Fund, which funds additional patrols, extra lighting and more CCTV. And indeed, the Street Safe online tool allows users, including those in her constituency, to pinpoint locations where they feel unsafe so that the local police can take appropriate action. And I'll continue to support her in her efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The two boys, 16-year-old boys, Charlie Botello and Kiani Sianko, were tragically killed in my constituency of Erith and Thamesmead this weekend. My heart goes out to the families and friends left behind. We really need to come across the House to address and tackle serious youth violence. So can I ask the Prime Minister what he is doing to address knife crime epidemic?
Prime Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question and join her in expressing my condolences to the family and friends of the two boys. I also read about it. It's an awful tragedy. She rightly asked what we are doing to make our streets safer and stamp out the scourge of night crime. We're boosting the number of police officers, as she'll know, 15,000 on our way to 20,000, and we're also giving them the powers they need to get knives off our streets, including lifting restrictions on stop and search and introducing new court orders to target known knife offenders. I agree with her, this is something we need to do more on, and she should know that the government will be fully committed to tackling it.
Gordon Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When will my right honourable friend's government bring forward any emergency legislation that's needed to deport those migrants who came across the channel illegally in small boats and are now being put up in hotels paid for by hard-pressed British taxpayers?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are determined to do whatever it takes to break the business model of people smugglers who are causing the needless loss of life of people across the Channel and putting unsustainable pressure on our asylum system. Our Nationality and Borders Act, opposed by the party opposite, Mr. Speaker, gives us new powers which we fully intend to use, and we will take further measures as required to properly control our borders and reduce the number of illegal crossings.
Andy McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was sad to see in a video from his Oxford days the future Prime Minister saying he hadn't a single friend who was working class. And he's not likely to make any soon, because while he sits on a personal fortune, he's refusing the reasonable demands of nurses, railway workers and many others forced to take industrial action just to make ends meet. Why doesn't he give them the wage increases they need and fund it by making the rich pay the same rate on unearned income as workers have to pay for their hard graft? And whilst he's at it, why not scrap the non-dumb tax loophole that he's all too familiar with, which is costing the public £3.2 billion?
Mr. Speaker, I have nothing but admiration and gratitude to our nurses for all the work they do. But Mr. Speaker, it is simply unreasonable and unaffordable to have a 19% pay rise. Now, if that's what the honourable gentleman thinks is, I'm sure the Labour Party can explain to us how they would pay for that and the impact it would have on inflation. But I tell you this, Mr. Speaker, if he really wants to support working people, maybe he should get off the picket line and end the strikes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The train service between Wilmslow in my constituency and London was always hourly, direct, and took 1 hour 50. Now, you'd be very lucky if you got a direct train, and the journey time is double, or often double. And that's not restricted to strike days, that's day in, day out on Avanti trains. So can the Prime Minister tell my constituents what the government's going to do to sort this out and get the West Coast service back to what it used to be, because the service at the moment is completely unacceptable?
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the unacceptable deterioration in the quality of Avanti's service. The Transport Secretary is rightly monitoring and holding them to account. There is a plan to increase the number of trains to 100 additional drivers, Mr. Speaker, and restoring the full direct service between Manchester and London. But what this plan needs, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the party opposite support it, is trade union cooperation.
Lyra Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure members opposite felt a certain sense of déjà vu watching the Welsh defence during last night's match. After all, they know what it feels like to have Marcus Rashford run rings round them. Mr. Speaker, off the pitch, Marcus Rashford has been a tireless campaigner on child hunger. So, in the face of fierce Conservative opposition. So, will the given that he delivered on the pitch last night, will the Prime Minister give him the best thanks possible by delivering free school meals for every child living in poverty?
Mr. Speaker, we're supporting almost 2 million children with free school meals. We also, last year, invested hundreds of millions of pounds in the new holiday activity and food programme, which is broadening that support through the holidays for those kids who need it, on top of our work to roll out breakfast clubs across the country.
Blake Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The pandemic has played havoc with school attendance, and the Children's Commissioner says that almost 115,000 children are now being home educated, a 34% higher than before the pandemic, with little, if any, monitoring of their educational welfare. Even worse, 9 in 10 local authorities believe they have not been able to identify home-educated children. So when will my right honourable friend be bringing forward the register of homeschooled children so they're identified and we can be sure that their needs are looked after and they're not falling through the net?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we support the right of parents to home-educate their children, and we know many do well, but however, this is not the case for all, and that's why local authorities must seek to identify those children missing education. We've published guidance on the arrangements they should be following, and indeed make sure that they have oversight of elective home education.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After record payouts last year to shareholders, the Royal Mail recently this year announced huge half-year losses and plans to cut 10,000 jobs, while threatening the cherished universal service obligation, which guarantees a minimum 6-day-a-week letter delivery service in the tradition of the black penny from 1840. Why has his government not yet committed to investigate the mismanagement and cack-handed mismanagement of this iconic British service and protecting its future and loyal postal workers?
Mr. Speaker, again, I have nothing but gratitude and appreciation for the hard work of our postal workers. But when it is not the right approach. It is not the right approach to go on strike, especially demanding pay, as we have heard, that is simply unaffordable for hard-working British taxpayers. The Honourable Lady would do well to see that, because in the context that we're in, it is simply not possible to give people the type of pay demands that they are making.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to the unique geography of Briggangool and the Isle of Axholme, we are one of the most flood-prone areas of the country. So whilst I welcome the record £5.4 billion of flood defence funding, can I ask the Prime Minister, ahead of next year's budget, to look at easing the rules around how that money is spent, so more of it can be spent on maintenance, which is so important to keeping my constituents dry?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to look at that for my honourable friend. He's right to highlight the doubling of the investment that this government has put in flood defences, but it's right that we get the mix right between that, and I'll take that away with him.
Liam Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The West Midlands Chief Constable has revealed that a vulnerable child was forced to spend 2 days living in a police station during a mental health crisis because the right specialist help could not be found for him. I know more and more young people are unable to access appropriate support for mental health. Will he accept Labour's plans to scrap private school charitable status and use the money to fund a mental health professional in every school?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the Honourable Lady, we've already committed to offer all state schools a grant to train a senior mental health lead by the end of this Parliament. Already 6 out of 10 have doing so. There's funding for all of them to have it. In addition to that, we're increasing the support that we give to those with eating disorders, because she's right, mental health does affect young people. This government is backing those people to get the support that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of people crossing the Channel is a national emergency. The number of migrants in hotels is a national emergency. Isn't it time we had a Cobra-style committee involving the DWP, DLUC, the Home Office and led by Number 10 to tackle this crisis?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share my honourable friend's frustration, and I want to reassure him that we will do whatever it takes to reduce the number of illegal crossings to this country, take any new powers that we need to. I look forward to working with him to ensure we can do that, because this is fundamentally about our sovereignty, Mr. Speaker, and the proper control of our borders. Whilst the Labour Party have tried to oppose every measure we have taken, we will keep going, because we need to make sure that we stop the crossings.
Christian Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the UK Government's Regulatory Policy Committee stated that the retained EU law bill is not fit for purpose. The Institute for Directors, the TUC and countless others have urged the Government to scrap the bill. And businesses across Scotland have already suffered severe economic damage under this Tory Brexit agenda, and they now see the outlook clouded with even more complexity and uncertainty. If the Prime Minister is serious about protecting the economy and looking after SMEs, why not do the right thing and scrap this disastrous ideological bill now?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually taking advantage of our freedoms is going to drive growth and jobs and prosperity in the United Kingdom. Whether it's in life sciences, whether it's reducing the burdens on data for those SMEs, whether it's in the financial services industry in Scotland, that's how we're going to create prosperity across this nation, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're going to get on and deregulate post-Brexit.
I'm going to come again, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend and the Chancellor have rightly pointed out that levelling up is for the whole of the United Kingdom. And as a Southampton man, my right honourable friend will know that since the 1970s, Eastleigh has been promised a much-needed Chickenhall Lane bypass. So will he agree to meet me and Hampshire County Council to finally get this project moving?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's right that we spread opportunity across the country, including in Eastleigh and the South. I understand that it's for Hampshire County Council to bring forward the proposal for the bypass, which I hope they do at the next funding opportunity, and I'll ensure that my honourable friend and the Council have a meeting with the Transport Minister as soon as possible.
Final question on Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tory ideology blocked onshore wind development in Scotland for years. Peterhead carbon capture clusters lost out in funding twice and still only classed as a reserve. Pump storage hydro schemes have been blocked because the UK Government won't discuss a pricing mechanism. If the Prime Minister actually does care about net zero and cares about Scottish jobs, will at least take action to advance Peterhead CCS and pump storage hydro in Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only are we supporting in this country carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind, all new technologies that will help us get to net zero, all of which will create jobs in Scotland, we're also supporting our transition, Mr. Speaker, and that's good for the Scottish economy and it's good for Scottish jobs and something the SNP would do well to support.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
So that is Prime Minister's questions, with the attack lines clearly on private education and housing. But we had the Prime Minister coming back strongly questioning the authority of the Labour leader. So it is a question of leadership and authority, and the issue about the picket lines and the strikes. Certainly one interesting suggestion from Keir Starmer, offering to lend Rishi Sunak Labour votes that he said he needed to pass the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, the mandatory housing targets. Of course, that is one of the problems that Rishi Sunak has with his backbenchers. But we're just going to stay with the Chamber because we're being told Angela Rayner will be asking an urgent question on the issue of the Ethics Commissioner. But I think we can just get a very... yes, in fact, the Speaker's just announcing that now. Back to the Chamber.
Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster if he will provide an update on the appointment of an independent advisor on ministerial interests and enforcement of the Ministerial Code.
Where is he? Where is he? Where's he going?
Minister.
Hello, Mr. Speaker. The government welcomes the opportunity to stress again the importance of the role of the independent advisor and this government's commitment to it. The Prime Minister has been very clear that the appointment of a new independent advisor is a priority and that the appointment process is underway. Honourable members will understand that appointment of this nature is significant and has to be done well. Much as honourable members might wish me to, it would not be appropriate for me to comment further on specifics of what is an ongoing appointments process. Let me assure honourable members the adjudication of issues of ministerial conduct does not stop because the independent advisor is not yet in post. Conduct matters and conduct issues will be dealt with quickly and appropriately, irrespective of that appointment process. This is what honourable members will have seen with regards to the complaints made against the Deputy Prime Minister. On receipt of formal complaints by the Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister requested an independent investigation to be conducted by an individual from outside government, and Adam Tolley QC has been appointed to conduct the investigation, and the terms of reference have now been published. The process is underway, and Mr Tolley will provide his report to the MP in due course. It is right that these matters are investigated fully, but it would not be right to comment further on them with that process ongoing. I'd also like to reassure honourable members that the process of managing the interests of ministers continues in the absence of an independent adviser. The Permanent Secretary, as the policy expert on each department's remit, leads the process in their department in the absence of an independent adviser. And the Cabinet Office is able to provide advice in line with precedent. All relevant interests are declared by ministers upon taking office and are kept up to date at all times. The publication of the list of ministers' interests is the end point of the ministerial interest process and takes place at regular intervals to make the public aware of the relevant interests of ministers. I'll end by reiterating that as soon as there is an update on the process to appoint an independent adviser on ministers' interests, the government will update the House.
Angela Redden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question. And how many times have I heard soon, jam tomorrow, mañana? We need the Prime Minister, who promised to appoint an independent ethics advisor as one of his first acts, to actually deal with this issue. Yet despite ministers accused of bullying and intimidation or reappointed despite security breaches, still no advisor. And it's clear that ethics and integrity isn't a priority for them, despite the Prime Minister's words. And we're told that recruitment is underway, but apparently no one will accept this poison chalice. So can he tell us today how many candidates have been approached and how many have refused the job? Will the Prime Minister follow his disgraced predecessors by denying the so-called independent advisor the power to launch their own investigations? Or does the Prime Minister have no plan to restore standards and will just preserve the rotten regime that he inherited? And what on earth is the system in the meantime? Who will investigate the allegations of Islamophobia made by one of his serving ministers against another? He mentions the Deputy Prime Minister, who had to demand an investigation into himself because the Prime Minister was too weak to do so. And how many formal complaints have now been made? The Minister mentions Adam Tolley. Why is he not allowed
Angela Rayner back on this issue of the independent adviser and reference there, of course, to the fact that Andrew Tolley, KC King's Counsel, is the person who's undertaking that independent investigation into allegations against Dominic Raab. But let's reflect with our two guests, Justin Tomlinson, Conservative MP, former Deputy Leader of the Tory Party, and indeed Perry Barr MP for Birmingham Labour, Khalid Mahmood. Right. Thank you both for being with us today. The two attack lines were on private education and on housing. Do you think he actually landed his punches on that, Keir Starmer?
The problem was the Prime Minister didn't even address the issue, as he normally doesn't. He went on saying what invests in education. The problem is there isn't sufficient money in education. He talks about giving people the opportunity, but you need to get people through qualification in the first instance to do that. So taking the money, which is not, these schools are not charities, taking the money away from them and putting them actually in education are the people who need it.
Yeah, but the problem is, of course, that Rishi Sunak was able to come back with his own personal experience about this issue of aspiration, which people do really want to acknowledge.
Yeah, but sort of money that they paid and the people paid, they don't need that additional sort of charity status. That charity can be spent on people who can't afford that much money to send their pupils to school, children to school.
And this line about the $6 million spent at Winchester College and rifle ranges and so on, I mean, are we in danger of getting into sort of, class war territory?
No, we're not interested in class war. Basic, simple thing is that we need to put more money into education for children. There's money here, and what Keir Starmer is saying, put that money for the people who need it.
Right. However, Keir Starmer went in on housing as well, which is a sensitive topic given the position of the backbenchers. Let me just read what his offer was. To lend Rishi Sunak Labour votes, he needs to pass the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill with mandatory housing targets. will there be some Tory backbenchers thinking, ooh, I wonder?
Well, it was a bit of a, if like the football last night, a game of two halves. Firstly, I thought on the education side, I thought he handled that well. I went to school, state school, bottom of the league tables. But when I hear this sort of politics of envy, I don't think that works with the public. And fundamentally, if you start clobbering those schools, those children are going to have to start returning to state schools. And believe me, there is nothing that upsets local parents, local voters more than their children not being able to get into schools.
Yeah.
And I'm a parent now, just filling in my first application for my eldest daughter. You want to be able to get in there. Anything that forces more children into the system, not a good
And of
thing.
course,
But-
we reflect also, we ought to mention that Keir Starmer went to an independent fee-paying school, Reigate Grammar School.
Yeah,
Even though it's a
good for
grammar
him.
school, it's an independent.
But you know, at the end of the day, politics of envy never works with the public.
Right.
I think so. Good start, I thought, for the PM on that one. I think the housing was a tricky one because it was a clever move by Keir to say, I will lend you the support. And the Prime Minister tried his best, and arguably we've been less bad of the last two sets of governments in the sense, yes, we're building more houses, but even when we built the highest amount in 31 years, it was still below the targets we need to make sure that housing becomes or remains within grasp of all generations.
Yeah,
and therefore it was a clever move to offer that support because it does put pressure on the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and Starmer indicating, a child born in the UK now will be 45 before they get their home for the first time, which is a pretty startling statistic.
And as I said right at the beginning of the show, it's important to social mobility.
Right.
It's one of the things that got me into politics.
Right.
But also it's about community cohesion, people having a stake in their own local community.
Did it work coming back with this attack line again about being on the picket lines? Because we've not seen Keir Starmer or any senior Labour member on the picket lines.
Well, we have had shadow ministers, and we've also had shadow ministers showing solidarity in different interviews, saying they stand with them. Now, that's not surprising. If you're taking £125 million of donations since 2010 from your paymasters to the trade unions,
really disappointing.
you don't get it. You don't get that for free.
OK, come back, Khalid, on that in terms of the attack line. You're still being paid by union paymasters.
We are, and it's totally transparent. And the trade union has gone through a vote to give the levy to the Labour Party, and above board and totally transparent, unless the way that the Tory party receives this money, huge amounts of money from all sorts of people, and their interests are in the end met.
Yeah.
And we can see through that legislation that goes through, and that's what happens. It's a transparent way of doing it, and the unions are holding us to account.
But it's tricky for Labour, given the problems that the public is suffering with transport, the worries about what's going to happen with NHS cover, the ambulance drivers now coming.
No, Mark. Most of the people at the moment are supporting the unions. That's why we're in the state that we're in. The RMT has been supported, the nurses have been supported, and everybody who wants to go on strike at the moment is supported because they see the huge issues they have to go through.
Would that change if we get this winter of discontent and the unions start to coordinate action?
What we need to do is get to those bosses, those industries that are paying huge amounts of money to their shareholders, which is what they're doing, is look after some of the interests of the working people. That's what people across the country want.
Right. Is it the fact that maybe the Tory policymakers and the strategists are thinking, let's try and keep these industrial disputes going because this could turn the public against both the unions and turn against Labour? I mean, would they be perhaps...
I think that sounds a bit too clever to a coordinated plan.
Speaks a former Deputy Party Chairman.
Yes, and a Minister of long-standing. We're certainly not that clever by half. But look...
I'm just thinking of that phrase that Callaghan never said, crisis, what crisis?
Fundamentally, our electoral chances, our ability to secure an unprecedented fifth term in office relies on a government growing. A growing government gets more money into people's pockets, keeps us with our record employment, gives that clear path to social mobility, opportunity and aspiration. These troubles are a big hurdle that we must navigate. If we don't, that puts us under pressure. I think it's a given. The public know the Labour Party is owned by trade unions. As you said, it's open and transparent. That's fine.
Yeah, but as you said, acknowledge that they are funded.
Of course they are. But the point is that's already bought in. So we don't gain anything new over that. But what we have to do is we have to navigate through those because we need the economy firing on all cylinders if we are going to navigate the challenges post-pandemic, post the Russia's illegal invasion on Ukraine. We need the economy firing.
And is that the reality, that no matter what happens in the chamber, no matter what happens about the various attack lines, that you've got to get people feeling more secure in terms of the economy to have a chance at the ballot box?
Whoever will win the next election will be the party that convinces people that they are going to make them better off, give them that hope and opportunity. You have to earn the right to represent people. You can't be less bad than the opposition. I've always been uncomfortable when we just simply use the lazy lines of, oh, they supported Corbyn. That's past now.
Yeah.
We've won those general elections.
Right.
Got to look forward. And I have to say, he's beginning to find his feet at PMQs. It was better. He was setting out some of the tangible benefits to equip us to be a backbenchers.
Without answering any of the real questions, and I think that's the problem. What you're saying about the trade unions, what you're saying about the people, these are the people who need that pay rise at the moment. You're stuffing the pockets of the shareholders is not going to help you at the next election. If we want to have a better standing and better economy for all of us, we've got to carry the workers through, and that's what we need to do.
Gentlemen, both, thank you very much for being with us. We'll hope to see you again. But let's bring in our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who's waiting for us down at Westminster, at College Green. Olivia, thanks for coming in with your assessment of, well, a score draw, maybe?
Yes, it feels as though Keir Starmer is sort of beginning to find his feet about what to use as attack lines against Rishi Sunak. His dilemma when Sunak came into power was that actually they're quite similar, Starmer and Sunak. When you compare Boris Johnson with his extremely colourful personal life and his chaotic management style to Keir Starmer, it was very easy for Keir Starmer to get some clear blue water between them. Liz Truss as well was a small market conservative. She was pretty radical in her policies, and Keir Starmer again could distance himself from that. But with Rishi Sunak, he faced the problem that politically there's not that much between them, and in terms of personality, they're not that dissimilar either. So what it seems as though Keir Starmer has decided to focus on now are the two W's. It's wealth. He's obsessed with Rishi Sunak's wealth, and he thinks that if he can keep on talking about how he's so privileged, that he's on the rich list, and if he can get that in there by talking about private education, he thinks that's going to hit hard with the country. And the other thing is weakness. The problem with Rishi Sunak is that, yes, he got the country behind him when he got the party behind him, when he became Prime Minister. But of course, there are lots of tensions still bubbling away in the Conservative Party. And on house building, for example, we know that they're split. We know that there are those who think that the way to growth is to get more houses and to get more young people on the housing ladder. That means building quickly. And then there are those on the other side of the party who feel as though they live in nice rural constituencies, they're worried about conservation, and they don't want to see huge houses building up in their area and more people living in small places which will put pressure on the schools. So Keir Starmer is using that. He's talking about Rishi Sunak's weakness, he's talking about his wealth, and interestingly, he's not actually talking that much about the politics between them.
Yeah, there was another W, of course, and that's Winchester College and its rifle ranges, which, again, was a bit of sort of class warfare, if you like. However, obviously, this acknowledgement about the difficulties that Rishi Sunak's got in his backbenchers, and this offer from Sir Keir Starmer to lend Labour votes to pass the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, i.e. on this problem of housing targets and the unease that many Tory backbenchers have got.
Yes, it was a very clever tactic because, again, you can see that Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak aren't that dissimilar in terms of what they want from housing. But Keir Starmer knows that Rishi Sunak is going to struggle to get that bill through because of the objections in sort of, can we call them, NIMBY-ish parts of the country. No Prime Minister wants to be getting important votes through with the help of the opposition. That puts them in a prime position of weakness. But obviously, Rishi Sunak can't really say anything apart from, well, yes, please, because otherwise it looks as though he's sort of putting politics ahead of the country. So again, it's Keir Starmer just digging the knife in there and sort of proving that Rishi Sunak, if you like, doesn't have the support of the Conservative Party. And ultimately, he hopes that that's what will bring the Prime Minister down, not having his own backbenchers behind him.
Olivia at Westminster, thanks very much indeed for that. And of course, more reaction to come about what we've been hearing in politics. But also, we've also got a Mark White exclusive coming up for you. The inner tubes discovered in one of those boats, indicating the treacherous journey now for the migrants coming across the channel, the people smugglers putting them at even more risk. Details coming up. First, let's take a break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
A bit of breaking news coming in on the World Cup. We can tell you that the average audience for the game last night, England-Wales, 16.6 million viewers, according to the ratings agency Barb. But here's the rub. That number does not include those who watched on the Welsh language channel S4C. Maybe because some of them switched off a little early, who knows? Anyway, England finishing the first stage of the World Cup at the top of the group after defeating Wales 3-0 last night. Those 2 goals from Marcus Rashford sealing the deal, ending the Welsh World Cup dream. But the 3 Lions now proceeding to the last 16. They're going to face off against Senegal on Sunday. Our North West reporter Sophie Reaper joined the Crowns at a fan zone in Manchester last night.
And they're through. After a 3-0 victory over Wales, Gareth Southgate's side have claimed their spot in the final 16 of this World Cup. As the final whistle blew, jubilation. All over England, fans celebrated. In Manchester, a 6,000-strong party began.
I'm absolutely over the moon. I can't believe it.
I thought it was amazing, the atmosphere, the fans.
What a goal! Fantastic performance. I think it was definitely an improvement from the USA game, and I'm hopeful now. I wasn't before, but I am now. Come on, England! Gareth Southgate's boys are winning it all! Go on, England!
Ahead of kick-off, the songs were loud. But there was also apprehension.
Very nervous. I hope that England are going to win, but I have faith in them. But, you know, it's always nervous before the game.
It's going to be a tricky game, and the Welsh can be quite a tricky team altogether, so pretty nervous as I am, yeah.
Considering the USA game, obviously we didn't win, but compared to Wales, I feel like we have a good chance.
Hopefully we can start with a bit of oomph.
Fans had a nervy wait, as it wasn't till the second half that the goals began to flow. For the Lions, it's onward. But for the Dragons of Wales, their World Cup dream is over.
Well, he wasn't brilliant, but we can still hold our heads up high. It's not about the results, it's about the memories.
3-0, yeah, it's not the greatest, is it really? But you know what? We made it to the World Cup. First time since 1958. Wales forever, baby. Wales forever!
A disappointment for a still proud Welsh side, but across the border, a different story.
With that win under their belts, England are moving on
Will this be the time that England's men are finally able to bring football home? Only time will tell. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
With some of her friends. Let's just reflect some of your views coming in on the politics of the day with Prime Minister's questions just having been, of course, Sky, first of all, saying Rishi Sunak's getting worse. No answers to any questions. Brings up everything apart from the answer. Alex, meanwhile, has said, I'm totally confused. Do the Conservatives know what they're doing with immigration and illegal crossings? While Rob says at PM's questions, the SNP renewed their wish for independence, yet want us to rejoin the EU. They say we're suffering. Do they know Europe has inflation and worker shortages, especially in agriculture and care? Keep those views coming. GBviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll reflect your reaction throughout the afternoon. Also coming up, don't go anywhere, we've got the verdict on PMQs and more strikes on the way. Before that, let's cheer ourselves up with the weather, maybe.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been another misty, foggy start in many places. That fog slowly lifting during the rest of the day, but leaving a lot of low cloud. Some places, though, getting some sunshine, predominantly northern Scotland, parts of West Wales, southern counties of England, actually increasingly so here. But for Northern Ireland, for western Scotland, thickening cloud and some outbreaks of light rain arrive from the west. And for a good part of central and eastern England, southern Scotland, we keep the low cloud. It's going to feel cold under that cloud, 3 to 7 degrees. Into the afternoon and evening, we're going to see the cloud break up a bit more across southern counties of England, parts of Wales, northern England. As that happens, though, and as skies clear, temperatures will fall away and we'll see a frost and fog reforming across these areas, and there'll also be a lot of low cloud remaining. Where we get that, a chilly start to Thursday, -3 or -4 Celsius in some sheltered spots, but not so chilly for Scotland and Northern Ireland, 7 to 9 degrees, but with some cloud and some rain. A weather front moving in from the west here. But that weather front is weakening as it comes up against the high pressure, which is really controlling our weather at the moment. So for Scotland, for parts of northern England, it's a damp start to Thursday. The rain petering out through the day and becoming more confined to the far north of Scotland eventually. Across England and Wales, after the misty, foggy start with the frost in places, skies do brighten, but there'll be a few fog patches lingering into the afternoon. Where that fog lingers, 2 to 5 Celsius. Where we get the sunshine, 7 to 10 degrees. And for Scotland, for northern England, it is a dull and in places damp day. The rain by the afternoon and evening, though, clears away. And for Northern Ireland, brighter skies in the afternoon with some clear spells into the evening. Now, for the rest of the week and into the weekend, easterly winds arrive. That will make it less foggy, but also make it a bit colder as well.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory.
twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, it's 1 o'clock and you're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up this hour, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer trading blows at PMQs over private schools, home ownership and control over their own parties. We'll be getting the verdict on who came out on top in their latest clash. Channel migrants taking significant risks with their lives by using tyre inner tubes now as makeshift life jackets. Another GB News exclusive report from Mark White will bring you all the details. And after last night's 3-0 victory for England in the World Cup, we're heading to Doha for reaction and a look ahead to tonight's games. Will the Socceroos now make it through to the knockouts? And as ever, we want to hear from you at home. Who do you think performed best? Not at the World Cup, but Prime Minister's questions. And what are your views on this winter of discontent as the strikes seem to be spreading? Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before that, the latest news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused the Prime Minister of being weak during a heated Prime Minister's questions this afternoon. Rishi Sunak came under fire from the opposition over private school funding, accusations he's failed to maintain house building targets and failure to act on the latest series of industrial strikes. Both party leaders also questioned each other over their support from their backbench MPs.
I've heard he's having a relaunch. Apparently it's called Operation Get Tough. So how tough is he going to get with his backbenchers who are blocking the new homes this country so badly needs?
Prime Minister! Mr. Speaker, we're delivering record numbers of new homes under this government. That's what we're doing. He talks about toughness, Mr. Speaker. He's too weak to stop dozens of his own MPs joining the picket lines.
HSBC will close 114 bank branches across the UK as remote banking soars in popularity. The banking giant says some of its stores have been serving less than 250 people a week, following a decline in footfall since the pandemic. Use of its mobile app, however, has almost tripled since 2017. The bank plans to invest tens of £millions, they say, in updating its remaining branches. There'll be 327 left after the closures next April. Now, strikes affecting postal and education services are continuing today as industrial actions taking place across multiple unions. 150 universities and colleges will be impacted, and so will 77 sixth form colleges in England as National Education Union staff go on strike. Royal Mail staff start another 2-day strike. They're all in disputes over pay or conditions. Meanwhile, members of the Communication Workers Union are planning 7 more strikes next month in what the union's calling the biggest strike demonstration this country's ever seen on the 9th of December. Well, meanwhile, ambulance workers across England are planning to strike before Christmas. It's part of a dispute over pay and staffing levels. Unison said thousands of 999 call handlers, ambulance technicians and paramedics will strike across the north, London, Yorkshire and South West. A member of the Buckingham Palace household has resigned and apologised after making unacceptable comments towards a guest at the Queen's Consort's reception last night. Ngozi Fulani, founder of a domestic abuse charity, says she was repeatedly asked where she really came from at the event. Describing the conversation as a violation, she said the household member challenged her claims that she was born in the UK and was British. Buckingham Palace say all members of the household are being reminded of diversity and inclusivity policies. A major trial of an experimental Alzheimer's drug has shown for the first time the early stages of the disease can be slowed. Scientists found after 18 months the drug stalled the disease progression by 27% compared with patients taking the placebo. However, experts warn as the medicine works during the initial stages of the disease, most won't benefit unless there's a revolution in spotting it. The results published in the New England Journal of Medicine have been hailed the beginning of the end. The Labour MP Stephen Kinnock, whose mother had the disease, welcomed the news.
Yeah, Alzheimer's is just a horrible disease. You find yourself grieving for somebody who's standing right there in front of you. I mean, it's of course very sad that this is too late for Mum, but incredibly encouraging that this research is coming forward.
Food inflation has risen to 12.4%. That is a record high since records began 17 years ago. The British Retail Consortium says the figure's nearly doubled since October, as rocketing energy, animal feed and transport costs forced up prices. The data also showed fresh food inflation rose even higher, 14.3%, with the cost of meat, eggs and dairy soaring the highest. For those of us planning to eat a traditional dinner on Christmas Day this year, consumers are being warned of a shortage of British free-range turkeys. The British Poultry Council says half the turkeys being produced for the festive season in the UK have already been killed in the bird flu epidemic. It said the total number of turkeys produced for Christmas was around 8 to 9 million birds, but around 1 million have been culled or died from bird flu. The England manager Gareth Southgate says the big business starts now after his team beat Wales 3-0 in their final Group B clash at the World Cup. Well, that's just a glimpse of clearly ecstatic England fans cheering at a fan zone in Manchester as goals from Marcus Rashford and Phil Foden gave England the victory. It means Wales are now out of the tournament. England will face Senegal on Sunday in the knockout stages. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. So, the first drug to slow the destruction of the brain in Alzheimer's has been heralded as a momentous breakthrough by scientists. The medicine lecanemab attacks the sticky beta-amyloid proteins building up in the brains of those people with the condition. Well, currently people with Alzheimer's are given other drugs to help to manage the symptoms, but none change the course of the disease itself. But this new antibody, such as those that the body actually makes itself to attack viruses or bacteria, has been engineered to tell the immune system to clear the amyloid protein from the brain. The drug's been subjected to a large-scale trial and work in the early stages of the disease so that early diagnosis is crucial if most sufferers are not to miss out. Let's get more with the significance particularly of this particular drug by Sian Gregory, who's from the Alzheimer's Society. Sian, thank you very much for your time and joining us. I think the Society has said this is game-changing. What does that actually mean in medical practice?
So essentially, this is the first time that we've seen a drug that can slow down the rate at which someone's symptoms in Alzheimer's disease get worse. So what that really means is that we are slowing down how quickly the disease gets worse, and that means that we are giving people more time with their loved ones with better quality of life. So on a daily basis, we think that that will be beneficial through continued use of this treatment if it was approved.
We ought to stress that this is for the early stages of the disease where it attacks the proteins building up in the brain.
Yeah, so this drug has been tested, the clinical trials, all of the evidence from those trials has been taken from studies that have involved people with early stage Alzheimer's disease. And we think that these drugs, because they clear the protein away at the which is the kind of one of the causes of this disease, we believe that that's the reason why they would be more effective in the earlier stages rather than the later stages. So diagnosis of these early stage cases is absolutely crucial if these drugs are to get approved and to become available.
Yeah, indeed. So obviously those trials and various tests have got to be gone through. I understand that there is the risk of some side effects such as brain bleeds that could be a problem.
So there were some side effects from the trial, and one of the most important things in clinical trials is the safety, and that is very closely monitored in all clinical trials. And essentially, in terms of the side effects of this drug, because this drug is not approved yet, that safety data will be scrutinised by the regulatory bodies who make decisions about whether to approve these drugs or not. And they will essentially look at the data about how effective this drug is, and they will look at the data about how safe it is, and that will be that data will be the basis of their decision that they'll make.
OK, and what about then those with more advanced Alzheimer's and other dementia effects? I mean, could this actually lead to a further development of treatment for that particular advanced Alzheimer's?
So I think one of the most exciting things that we've heard from recently was the government recommitting to their national dementia mission. And that really is a recommitment to an investment in research, should I say. And at Alzheimer's Society, we are incredibly excited about that because we, as you say, we need more research into treatments for more advanced types of Alzheimer's disease and more treatments for the other types of dementia as well, that this drug wouldn't help patients who have other types of dementia. So that investment is going to drive more research, help us understand what's going wrong in these different diseases of the brain to cause dementia, and will help us get better treatments and better ways of diagnosing them.
So the impetus is there as a result of all this?
Absolutely, yeah. Every clinical trial that we have in dementia gives us more information. And so, we hope that we're going to learn more and more with every clinical trial. We know there's 117 different drugs being tested in clinical trials at the moment for Alzheimer's disease alone. So we're going to be hearing a lot more about future updates on those different drugs in the coming years as well.
Good. Sian, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, one person in particular who's helped to get that impetus growing is Formula One racing legend Sir Jackie Stewart, whose wife, Lady Helen, diagnosed with dementia in 2014 with the charity Race Against Dementia. Sir Jackie, thanks for joining us on GB News once more. And your approach was to get the Formula One problem-solving mindset onto this particular problem. It does look as if that's paid some dividends in this case.
Well, I certainly hope so, and certainly it's great that there is this news coming forward. I've heard about it for some time now, as a matter of fact, because obviously with Helen having dementia, I'm experiencing what so many other people are suffering from at the present time as families, because it's been a terrible illness for so many years, for now so far too many years, naturally, whether it's been the medical world itself or whether it be the pharmaceutical industry, there just has not been enough put into it and investments, etc., to get where we are today. Now, just today, and I've known about this for quite some time now that it's coming along, we hear that there is something that's going to help people. It's not going to cure people, as I understand it at the present time, but it might make it more possible for those people who have it to have a better quality of life. And that in itself would be a real good start. Obviously, we've got to get to a point where we're going to have our elderly people not having dementia with preventive medicine rather than just corrective medicine. And that's what I've been looking at. We've got young PhDs all over the world now because we thought through motor racing, where problem solving happens so rapidly and things get done so quickly. This was a good example for us getting these young PhDs that we pick up in every corner of the world, the very best ones coming out of the best medical universities. We buy them, if you like, to get them to find a cure for us or a way that it's going to lead to a cure. So I'm very grateful to hear that this next step is coming. It's not over yet and it's not a cure yet, but if it's going to be better for a family and certainly more of a help to that family to look after their loved ones, then wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, experts saying it could be the beginning of the end in the search for treatment. And as you've indicated with motor racing, it does seem to be an international approach, not just Britain trying on its own, and that the various medical bodies are coming together. But you've touched on an interesting point there. It's not just the person suffering from the condition. It's the family around them and the stress and the weight and the grief, as Stephen Kinnock said, that surrounds the family in its entirety.
It's a hideous situation, in fact, for many families. They lose their loved ones. They've got to send them to homes. You know, because I've been a racing driver, I've had the privilege of being able to have staff looking after Helen for all those years. We've got 17 neuro nurses looking after Helen, 2 at a time, but 24 hours a day. Now, I can afford that just because I was a racing driver. But that's not the case for most people. So that's why there's an urgency in my life, you know, to bring something together during the period of Helen's life and my life to allow other people around the world to be given an opportunity for some quality of life, to have an illness. At the present time, those people who are in many of those homes are very sad and very lonely people.
Yeah.
And it's a very cruel illness. So I say a great big thank you to those who have brought something now, because it's taken too long. Can you imagine now that 1 in every people who are born today, everybody born today, 1 in 3 are going to die from dementia at the present time? And there's more people die of dementia than cancer or any other illness. And yet there is no cure. So this move that we see coming into the media today is great news, and I applaud for it.
Yeah.
But it's not a cure yet. We've got a long way to go, but I think the more we talk about it, the more pressure is put on to the industry, to the industry as a whole, just not just the medical people, but the manufacturers of the drugs and so forth, the more chance that we're going to have of a better performance.
And as you've indicated, not just the medical breakthrough itself, but the hope now that it's giving everyone, which is perhaps as important. Do you mind me asking how Lady Helen is actually doing at the moment?
Well, by 5:30 in the early evening, Helen really doesn't know where she is. She thinks we've got another house very close by, and that's not true. But it's and it will happen during the rest of the evening until she goes to bed, that she keeps saying, "Are we going to our other house now, darling?" And there is no other house in the area that Helen believes exists. That's a little thing. Helen can hardly walk now. It's a very cruel illness for a family and a loved one. And we've been married for over 60 years, and we've had a great relationship.
Yeah.
But a terrible thing for a husband or the children of Helen and I, for example. And one of them is here today, just as having lunch with us almost now. It's a cruel, cruel illness, because the family cannot care for that dementia patient as time goes on. They can't afford it. And they're sending them to homes. Sometimes they can't see them because of the virus. Some people couldn't for 3 years visit their loved ones because it was such an infectious thing. So all of us who hear today that there is something moving in the positive area, then we all applaud it. And we just hope that it's only the beginning, and rapidly, like Formula One, find a way to get the car perform better and to win more races.
Yeah. And we remember, of course, that image of her on the pit wall with the stopwatch next to Ken Tyrrell, and perhaps, hopefully, that race will be one, and you'll see a checkered flag on this as well. So, Jackie, in the race against dementia, thanks very much indeed for joining us from your home there in Switzerland. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And we'll update you, of course, on the latest on that medical breakthrough. But let's update you now on another exclusive here on GB News. Channel migrants taking significant risks, we're told, with their lives by using tyre inner tubes, would you believe, as makeshift life jackets. Well, GB News camera crew filmed one abandoned boat full of those tubes, which a source said were absolutely no substitute for proper life-preserving equipment. That discovery comes as the authorities have confirmed more than 1,300 crossed the channel in 24 small boats in the past 2 days. Yesterday alone, 884 crossing, according to official figures from the Ministry of Defence. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has the latest details.
Adrift in the middle of the English Channel, a small migrant boat, its human cargo picked up by a border force vessel a short time earlier. It's not unusual to see these boats left abandoned in the middle of this busy shipping lane. The priority for authorities is to ensure the safety of those on board first. They'll often return for the boat later. But as we approach this vessel, the deeply alarming sight of dozens of tyre inner tubes inside. They were clearly being used as makeshift life jackets. But authorities warn they are absolutely no substitute for proper life preservers. On the other side of the channel, on a beach near Sangatte, more evidence that inner tubes are now being used. They're clearly visible inside this boat, which was intercepted by French police before it could get into the water. Walking away from the boat, this group of migrants, not one of them wearing a life jacket. Although there is evidence the French authorities are more active along these beaches, the long-suffering locals here are not optimistic this crisis will be over anytime soon.
It feels like things have been left as they were for years. It's been 30 years that Sangatte has been living to the rhythm of the refugee crisis.
Makeshift life preservers were often used a year or two ago when the people smuggling operations were less sophisticated. But these days the crime groups are much more organised and have well-sourced supply lines. Life jackets are normally standard issue on their illegal boat trips. The use of inner tubes, once again, could indicate a disruption in the supply chain, perhaps due to law enforcement activity. After a fortnight of bad weather, the small boats are back with a vengeance. 1,300 people have crossed in 24 inflatables in the past 2 days alone. Other sightings are being reported as the calm weather continues for at least another day. Mark White, GB News.
Mark's joining us now in the studio with the latest on this extraordinary story. Mark, I guess there are two ways you can interpret this. Whether this is increasing desperation or it's the fact that the authorities are starting to get an effect on the supply chain for the boats and the life jackets and so on.
It may well be. We've seen with law enforcement activity in the past, Mark, sometimes when we've had raids that have dismantled a particular crime group involved in the people smuggling, that's cut the supply of small boats, for instance, and has actually led to a temporary reduction in the numbers coming across. We might be witnessing something similar, or it could just be due to the fact that we've got extraordinary numbers of people who are coming across the channel. They may have run out of the life jackets that they would normally give them, and they've reverted back to something that they did a couple of years ago when they were less sophisticated, which was just using these little tyre inner tubes in the water. Now, the difficulty with these is people say, well, you can float with that. But if you're in freezing cold water, it's extremely difficult to grip onto these things. And after a while, you become numb. And it's almost impossible
to hold. Your head tilts back and you're in the water and that, And of
different with the life jacket, of course, because it's fastened round you.
Yeah, and we've got a court action going on at the moment in terms of the 27 who died, well, maybe even more, we don't know, because some are still missing on that boat that went down. I mean, the figures, again, are quite extraordinary. 884, according to the MOD, in 17 boats. I mean, is this where they're trying this last ditch to get across before the weather breaks for the winter?
Yeah, well, it's this time of year now, Mark, where the weather is a lot less predictable.
Yeah.
There are good days of calm conditions that we're seeing at the moment, and when that happens, that's normally when you will get a surge in the small boats trying to get across in those weather windows. So that's what we're seeing at the moment. Unusually, November has been, pretty bad for a good 2 or 3 weeks in the Channel. This time last year, November was actually the busiest month of the year in the Channel. Not this time, but we've got this weather window, which is about at least another day. So there's more activity. More activity actually as we speak taking place in the Channel. Boats from France and the UK responding to a number of sightings.
Now, the other issue is that we've got Robert Jenrick acknowledging openly that the Home Office has effectively abandoned this, what they call the pushback approach, literally physically putting the boats back onto the French coast.
It's not a surprise, really. There was a lot of eyebrows raised when Priti Patel, the then Home Secretary, announced that this was going to be a policy. And actually, how can you do it ensuring that they would be safely pushed back to the beach? There was real concerns that migrants would just jump into the water or that boats could be overturned. But they even went as far as buying these jet skis for Border Force personnel. We saw them out training on the jet skis to rehearse this particular tactic, but it was only ever going to be used in a small number of occasions. And actually, if you're the skipper of a major Border Force vessel, taking that decision, which could potentially end in tragedy, you'd be a brave skipper to actually give the order.
Especially if all the people inside the boats have just got a tyre inner tube as their safety net. So, yeah. Mark, as ever, thank you for updating us on that story. And, of course, we'll see what happens in the days ahead with, as you say, this weather window at the moment. But for the moment, thank you very much. Coming up, is it strike o'clock? Unions across the country meeting today for a rally. And we'll also be picking apart PMQs, who actually succeeded between Sunak and Starmer as they traded blows over education, housing and, yes, those strikes. Short break now, though.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live with another strike day, yet more walkouts as industrial unrest appears to spread across the country. Royal Mail postal workers starting a fresh 48-hour stoppage in their dispute over pay and conditions. And elsewhere, sixth form college staff and university lecturers walking out today. The National Education Union saying its members have taken that action with great reluctance, accusing the government of failing to protect their pay and living standards. A national rally taking place in central London with other union leaders, including the RMT and Unison, attending. So could we be facing the prospect maybe of some kind of general strike as the unions join together? But first, let's speak to Andy Fury, Deputy General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, in that dispute over the postal service. Andy, thank you very much indeed for joining us once more. You were here in the GB News studio, of course, the other day. With the concentration now on other disputes, do you think that this could add pressure on the various employers to come to the table?
Well, I sincerely hope that Royal Mail does come to the table, Mark, and joins the CWU in meaningful negotiations. That's what we're calling for. We're urging Simon Thompson, the CEO, to embark upon meaningful negotiations, to commit the time and the effort. We're prepared to meet him in the negotiations. Our General Secretary wrote to him yesterday and said, let's get around the table, and that's what we want to do, is thrash out a deal.
What is the problem? Is it just the amount in terms of the pay deal, or is it the modernisation as well? Because clearly we had Rishi Sunak at PMQs indicating yet again we can't afford all these pay rises.
Well, I think it's a bit of a myth to say it's about pay. Obviously, pay is important to our members, and being able to survive in today's economic climate is important. But a pay rise is no good if you haven't got a job. So this is really about jobs. And only on Monday afternoon, Royal Mail wrote to me and was proposing a criteria for compulsory redundancies. And this is shocking. A Royal Mail company, iconic across the UK, talking about compulsory redundancies. I mean, it's unheard of, and really they should hang their heads in shame that they brought this about.
Is it right that the figure of some 10,000 job cuts has been mentioned?
Yes, so on the 14th of October, Simon Thompson, the CEO, went to the markets and said they were looking to cut the jobs by up to 10,000. We've subsequently found out that they have plans way beyond that. And our fear, and it's a legitimate fear, is that it could be double that in actual fact.
How would a postal service work with that number of job cuts?
Well, that's our deep concern. So it's not just the people that's job security that's vitally important. It's about actually the service to the customer, to the society. Our members pride themselves in delivering to the public's home addresses, 32 million addresses, 6 days a week, letters and parcel. And we are really fearful that this is about destroying the much cherished service that the public love.
OK, Andy, thank you for that. As that stoppage with CWU continues today, but of course elsewhere we've got other unions involved. Let's bring in Ellie Costello, our correspondent at King's Cross, where a rally is taking place. And Ellie, of course, this is the concern that union action may become more coordinated, heading to what people are calling this winter of discontent.
Absolutely, Mark. It does seem like strike is the word of the season, doesn't it? We're outside King's Cross Station now, where hundreds upon hundreds of people have turned out. They are actually filling the concourse outside King's Cross Station. You might be able to make out behind me a sea of pink. People have brought their drums out here. There's other people with trumpets, and they're also ringing their bike bells. It's all in solidarity with university lecturers and also support staff. There are librarians here, there are IT technicians. They are all here asking for the same thing, which is better pay, better conditions and better pensions. They are making their voices heard here in central London. They've come from all over the UK. 150 institutions are represented here. This is their third day of action. They've already been striking last Thursday and Friday. They're striking again today, and they have come from all over the country on their coaches to have their voices heard in London. But it's not just lecturers, there's also some students here in solidarity, and I've got two of them with me now. If you'd just like to come and join me. Would you like to introduce yourselves? What are your names?
My name's Akshita.
Akshita.
My name's Libby.
Libby, lovely to meet you both. And, you know, you're the people that people are speaking about today. You're the students. Why have you decided to come out and support your lecturers today?
Well, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to be like molding the minds of the future. And we're always constantly saying that like things like climate change and climate issues and about like politics and all of that kind of thing, that our generation is going to be the ones to change all of that. And the tutors that are here today, the tutors that we're striking for today, are the ones that are going to give us the tools and equipment and stuff that we need to be able to do that. And our teachers give so much.
Yeah.
Like, to us, like even through the pandemic and stuff. So it just didn't feel right to not come and support them today.
So you feel like your lecturers are being underpaid, but there's lots of people looking at you and thinking you both pay £9,250 a year for your education, and you've just lost 3 days of your education. They feel sorry for you. What do you say to people who are thinking that at home?
Don't feel sorry for us, for one. That is not at all the response that should be there. These 3 days that we're missing of learning, it's irrelevant compared to the way our lecturers are being treated. And our lecturers, honestly, they give us everything. They give us like the passion and inspiration that as performing arts students we need. And this is something we fully stand by. We're theatre and social change students, so this is something to us as well that is so important, because like I said, our lecturers, they give us everything they have and their efforts. And it's not only about pay anymore, it's about basic respect for these people that throw everything into their work. To us, 3 days, this is more important than 3 days of missing uni.
So you're here to support your lecturer. Just tell me what's on your badges here.
Oh, I've got a sticker that says, I'm standing with UCU, because I am.
And I have a Cats Against Casualisation.
Yep, and you've got a sign down here as well. Tell me what your sign says.
UCU Rising.
UCU Rising. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for speaking to me. Really do appreciate your time. Well, there you go, Mark, hearing from the students who are here in solidarity with their lecturers who have refused a 3% pay increase. That's the offer on the table from universities. They say it's not high enough. They want more like 12%. They want higher than the rate of inflation. A quick word on what the universities say back. They say that any increase in pay puts jobs at risk. They say that 30% of universities are already in deficit. It's simply not something that they can afford. But Mark, you can see the sheer number of people that are here and the sheer amount of support there is for lecturers and support staff at higher education institutions across the country. And really, Mark, you can hear on that speaker behind me, they are truly making their voices heard. They want better pay, better conditions and better rates of pension.
Ellie at King's Cross, thank you very much indeed for updating us on that rally. And the voice also coming from Eurostar, because just to update you on this winter of discontent, strike fever spreading to Eurostar rail service this afternoon. Security staff saying they will down tools for 4 days over Christmas. We'll keep you updated on all that. Let's keep you updated on the news headlines now with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. It is 1:36. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Buckingham Palace says a staff member has resigned and apologised after making unacceptable comments towards a guest at the Queen's consort's reception last night. Ngozi Fulani, founder of a domestic abuse charity, said she was repeatedly asked where she really came from. Describing the conversation as a violation, she said the household member challenged her claims that she was born in the UK and was British. Buckingham Palace say all members of the household are being reminded of diversity and inclusivity policies. HSBC will close 114 bank branches across the UK as remote banking soars in popularity. The banking giant says some of its stores have been serving less than 250 people a week, following a decline in footfall since the COVID pandemic. The bank plans to invest tens of millions of pounds in updating its remaining branches. There'll be 327 left after the closures next April. A major trial of an experimental Alzheimer drug has shown for the first time the early stages of the disease can be slowed. Scientists found after 18 months the drug stalled the disease progression by 27% compared with patients taking the placebo. However, experts warn as the medicine works during the initial stages of the disease, most wouldn't benefit unless there is a revolution in spotting it. The results published in the New England Journal of Medicine have been hailed, though, as the beginning of the end. Food inflation has risen to 12.4%. It's a record high since records began 17 years ago. The British Retail Consortium says the figure's nearly doubled since October, as rocketing energy, animal feed and transport costs forced up prices. The data also showed fresh food inflation rose even higher to 14.3%, with the cost of meat, eggs and dairy soaring the highest. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're up to date on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Well, let's reflect on Prime Minister's questions earlier with clashes over housing and private schooling between the Labour leader and the Prime Minister. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who joins us now at Westminster. And Tom, a whiff of class warfare with all this suggestion about the rifle ranges of Winchester College and all the money being spent on private education. Clearly, the sort of indication is that Keir Starmer wants to bang this message home with the public.
Yes, a very interesting choice from the Labour Party leader. Of course, he has been under scrutiny himself for the last 2 days on the front page of the Daily Mail, saying that this is a Corbynite policy retained by Labour to whack tax on school fees of people who go to independent schools. Of course, something that has not happened under previous governments of any shade. In fact, something that Tony Blair and New Labour steered well clear of for the fear that they would be accused of class warfare. Well, Sir Keir Starmer seems very happy to dive into this, seeing it not as an attack against him, but seeing it almost as a populist crusade, using it as his very first question today at Prime Minister's Questions. And clearly Rishi Sunak a little bit on the back foot, not expecting this line of attack, perhaps, and having a very fervent Labour Party sort of jeering him down. Of course, we do know that Rishi Sunak is a very wealthy individual, arguably the wealthiest person to ever have been Prime Minister, and the Labour Party clearly is wanting to use this sort of class divide in terms of their framing. However, it must be said that Sir Keir Starmer isn't exactly a man of the people. He himself went to a grammar school which turned into a private school while he was in attendance, and he has been pictured at fundraising events for this private school since he left as well, in what he says are school reunions. So yes, an interesting dividing line to pull there. But interestingly, after Prime Minister's Questions, us journalists up in the press gallery get to go back and ask questions of the Labour Party's spokesman, Sir Keir's spokesman, as we do once a week. And we dove down on this policy. What would it actually mean in detail? Would it come in a sort of staggered way so that no one in the middle of their GCSEs or A-levels would have to leave due due to higher costs. The answer from the Labour Party was surprisingly stark. This would come in the first term of a Labour government, all in one go. In one fell swoop, higher taxes levied on the school fees of people who attend independent schools. Asked if they accepted, that would mean that perhaps thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of just about managing middle-class students whose parents are scrimping and saving to get them over that line, would they then have to drop out? The Labour Party didn't accept that, saying they didn't think a single student would have to drop out, despite the cost of living pressures and the increased costs that would be levied by this Labour Party tax. A really interesting line, really digging in to this assertion that these schools should have this extra tax.
Of course, Rishi Sunak coming back saying it was about supporting aspiration with his own experiences, of course, with his parents supporting him. But the other aspect then is that Keir Starmer identifying all the problems on the backbenches over housing particularly, offering Labour votes perhaps to the Prime Minister to get policies through.
Yes, this is something we learnt last week, that the Labour Party was willing to stand by the Prime Minister to get the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, the LURB as it's known in Whitehall, to get that through. It's a mammoth piece of legislation central to the government's Levelling Up promise. But the Prime Minister himself not wanting this enormous rebellion of his own backbenchers, wanting instead to talk to his backbenchers on various sides of the arguments, those who want to end the ban on onshore wind farms, those who want to remove housing targets imposed on local authorities and the like as well. The Prime Minister wanting to bring these individuals in for discussions to see if there's a way through without enormous rebellions, rather than relying upon Labour Party votes. But it is an interesting line in the sand that the Labour Party leader is drawing on all of these issues. He's saying that the Prime Minister is beholden to special interests on fee-paying schools. He says that the Prime Minister is being pushed around by members of his own party on the planning bill. And ultimately, that leads the Labour Party to its consistent line of attack it's used now for a number of weeks at Prime Minister's questions, that the Prime Minister is weak.
OK, Tom, we'll have to leave it there because I think it's time for you to repent on your sins, according to your friend Johnny there once more at Westminster. However, let's reflect now on a royal row breaking out, a member of the royal household resigning after she asked a prominent black campaigner where she really came from. Ngozi Fulani, a campaigner for survivors of domestic abuse, said the comments were a violation that will never leave me. Well, the palace called the incident deeply regrettable and unacceptable. Let's get more with our royal reporter Cameron Walker joining us from Boston in the United States, where the Prince and Princess of Wales are going to be seen publicly fairly soon. The problem being, of course, Cameron, that Lady Susan Hussey, the person in question, is William's godmother.
Well, exactly, Mark. This is turning into a big distraction for the Earthshot Prize for Prince William and Princess Catherine. But these are very, very serious allegations which have been made against a member of the royal household in the last few hours or so, really. And it's the member of the royal household in question asked a black domestic abuse campaigner at a reception at Buckingham Palace yesterday where she really came from. Now, Buckingham Palace isn't naming the now ex-member of the royal household, but it's been widely reported that it is, as you said, Lady Sarah Hussey. Now, she has, if the reports are to be believed, has now quit her honorary role. She was the Queen, the late Queen's lady-in-waiting for more than 60 years. Now, a Buckingham Palace spokesperson has released a statement, and it actually happened very quickly after the allegations took place, which I think gives a sense as to just how seriously Buckingham Palace is taking this matter. I'll just read it to you. They said, "We take this incident extremely seriously and have investigated immediately to establish the full details. In this incident, unacceptable and deeply regrettable comments have been made. We have reached out to Ngozi Fulani on this matter and are inviting her to discuss all elements of her experience in person if she wishes. In the meantime, the individual concerned would like to express her profound apologies for the hurt caused and has stepped aside from her honorary role with immediate effect. All members of the household are being reminded of the diversity and inclusivity policies which they are required to uphold at all times. Now, unfortunately, this echoes back to Meghan and Harry's Oprah interview in 2021, when Meghan accused an unnamed member of the royal family of questioning what colour Archie's skin would be when he was born. Then the late Queen Elizabeth then famously released a statement saying recollections may vary, but this is all playing into the narrative that some people believe that members of the royal household are institutionally racist. Of course, Harry and Meghan are also picking up the Ripple of Hope Award next week in New York, where for that exact reason, that they stood up to the royal family and what they see, or the people who are giving them awards see, as institutional racism. As I said, huge big distraction for Prince William's Earthshot Prize, and he has publicly said in the past that he can categorically say that the royal family are not racist.
Yes, Lady Susan Hussey, as you say, reports suggesting 83 years old, the Queen's lady-in-waiting for many years and kept on by the Queen Consort as one of these new unofficial aides, but seemingly stepping down from that. But just to reiterate the importance of this visit, which is, I think, Earthshot and the prize that's being awarded by the Prince of Wales there, it was described, I think, by a royal aide, this was his Super Bowl moment of the year. It's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. I mean, first of all, it's their first visit to the United States since 2014 for Will and Kate, their first international visit with their new titles of Prince and Princess of Wales. And you're right, it is their Super Bowl moment, according to palace sources. And what I mean by that is it's Prince William's chance to be a global leader on climate change. But Prince William is doing things a bit differently from his father. If you remember back at COP26, when Charles was Prince of Wales, he said we needed to be on a warlike footing to tackle the climate crisis, very much as some would see as doom and gloom scaremongering. Prince William's not doing that. It's very much about climate optimism and realising that we can actually find solutions to these problems to repair our planet. So here is my report. How do you turn seaweed into edible shots?
Cheers.
Cheers. This week, British startup Notpla, as in Not Plastic, is up for a £1 million reward from Prince William's Earthshot Prize. Revive Our Oceans is one of the categories, and the company successfully reduces the need for ocean-clogging plastic by turning seaweed into biodegradable containers. Containers that you can eat.
There's nothing that nature cannot deal with.
The company's co-founder, Pierre Paslier, believes having Prince William on board will help find alternatives to harmful plastic.
Having the Earthshot Prize support solutions like ourselves is huge, because the industry is still very backward thinking. People don't really think out of the box. Everyone thinks that the only solution is recycling, whereas we've spent 50 years kind of like proving that actually it's not going to get us out of this problem.
It's all about urgent optimism. Instead of what some would see as doom and gloom scaremongering, Earthshot is instead about celebrating genuine solutions that could repair our planet. Dubbed his Super Bowl moment, the Prince will be joined in Boston by a long list of A-listers, including singer Billie Eilish and Hollywood actor Rami Malek. The Waleses are keen to spend extra time in the city too, supporting the most hard-pressed communities and showcasing a Boston that cares for the climate. It's their Royal Highnesses' first international visit since taking on their new roles, but royal aides insist it's not a traditional royal tour. Instead, Earthshot is the big focus, and those close to Will and Kate are determined not to get distracted by another royal couple living in California. The Prince and Princess made a point of visiting one of last year's winners, Coral Vita, in the Bahamas earlier this year. Sam Teicher, who co-founded the company to restore the world's dying coral reefs, has first-hand experience working with the couple.
They are really passionate about protecting the planet, leaving a legacy behind that not only the natural world but humanity can benefit from, and are pretty phenomenal freedivers, I gotta say. And they didn't want to stop planting corals. It was a shame they had a flight to catch, because I don't think they wanted to get out of the water.
On Friday, the second annual Earthshot Prize Awards will happen at the MGM Music Hall in Boston. The ceremony will be broadcast globally on Sunday. Cameron Walker, GB News. Well, here I am in Boston, the birthplace of John F. Kennedy. And the reason I mentioned that is because what Prince William was inspired by to create Earthshots. JFK created the moonshot, trying to meet the seemingly impossible task to get a man on the moon. Prince William created Earthshots to try and meet the seemingly impossible task to solve climate change. So that is why Boston is hosting the second annual Earthshot Prize. But it's very much, I think, also about, especially today when William and Kate arrive, it's about representing the royal brand abroad, especially in the United States. There's going to be a big welcome ceremony a little bit later on this afternoon in Boston, attended by a member of the Kennedy family and the Mayor of Boston, and there'll be a number of other engagements tomorrow which are close to William and Catherine's hearts.
Indeed, which is why a royal racism row is not exactly helpful indeed. Cameron, with a wonderful cityscape there of Boston, thank you very much indeed. And of course, more from Cameron as that royal tour continues. From one skyline to another, and let's reflect. England are through to the last 16 of the World Cup in Qatar, now facing the runners-up of Group A, Senegal, on Sunday evening. Well, the games today in Group D, Australia and Denmark battling it out for second place in that group. Australia only need a draw, but Denmark need to win. Group C games, Argentina, Poland, Saudi Arabia and Mexico playing tonight at 7, all with a chance of getting through to the knockouts. So plenty to keep our GB News reporter Paul Hawkins still occupied in Doha. Paul, thanks for joining us once again. I think I'll probably draw a veil over last night and move on. Still plenty of football to come.
Absolutely, yeah, lots to look forward to. Listen, Mark, no one would blame you for feeling that way. Kind of Wales fans we speak to last night, this morning, feeling a little bit flat, to be honest. Kind of, there is that feeling that, yeah, we went to a World Cup, first one since 1958. It was great. We're just great to be here. But there is that feeling that we didn't quite play to our potential. We weren't great against Iran. We weren't great against England. A little bit better defensively, at least for the first half. But we never really troubled any teams while we were here. So a lot for Wales to take in. Where do they go from here? What happens to Gareth Bale, Aaron Ramsey, Joe Allen, all in their early 30s? Will they be there at the Euros in Germany in a couple of years' time? Probably, but are they going to be at their peak? That's the question mark. And what about the next World Cup in 4 years' time? So Wales in a period of transition, one would think. Could be the beginning of the end of this kind of quote-unquote golden generation. But for England, they move on to Senegal. They're looking at playing the African champions on Sunday evening. Going to be very difficult for England, but they're on an upward trajectory after last night. After the USA game, very flat last night. Let's not talk about the first half, but the second half, very good. 2 individual goals from Marcus Rashford, fantastic stuff, and also Phil Foden. So Gareth Southgate, the England manager, justifying his selection, and this is how England fans are feeling today. The morning after, how are you feeling?
Relieved.
Well, that's the interesting word you used. Why relieved?
After the American game, we were useless, absolutely useless, yeah. And the Americans deserve to win that. And then you think what team's going to turn up against the Welsh, and you got the rivalry and everything. So like just to get the 3-0 win was like amazing. It's very similar to the USA game. I mean, we played it too safe. You know, there was no sort of creativity. We weren't trying to get the balls in behind or anything like that, or open. So we just ended up playing far too safe for what we could have done. What we saw in the Iran game, where we were exciting and scoring goals and creating chances. So yeah.
So, Paul, is it fair to say there's been a reassessment of how far England could go, with Rashford now seemingly firing on all cylinders and, of course, as you said, Foden in the team?
Interesting way you phrase it, Mark. I would say that putting Rashford and Foden in definitely makes the England team look better, given the form they're in and the way they played last night. But what I would add when it comes to caution is that Rashford scored a great free kick, so a set piece, and then his other goal, a piece of individual brilliance, cutting in, driving at the Welsh defence and firing it through the legs of the Welsh keeper. And Phil Foden's goal coming from a Wales mistake. But cohesively as a team, they started to gel towards the later stages. But England are going to have to crank it up a couple of gears more, even compared to their performance against Iran. They're going to have to go up a level because Senegal are significantly better than all three teams that they faced in the group stages. They're the African champions. Players like Eduardo Mendy, who plays in goal for them, he also plays for Chelsea. Their captain, Koulibaly, plays for Chelsea as well. They've got players that play in the Italian leagues, Premier League, also in France. They know the England players very well. Yes, they're missing their best player, one of the world's best players, Sadio Mane, who used to play for Liverpool, now at Bayern Munich. He's injured, so missing the tournament. But they will still be a much more physical, much more technical threat to England. So England are going to have to produce a performance that we haven't seen yet at this World Cup if they're to progress to the quarterfinals.
Socceroos in action. What chances for them do we think?
Listen, France will qualify from that group when they take on Tunisia later. We know that, which is a question whether they finish first or second, one would have thought, given how they're playing at the moment. Kylian Mbappe looking like the world's best player as well. France should come through that, but they're playing Tunisia, and we know the historical links between those two countries. Huge Tunisian population in France. If the Tunisians were to turn over the French, that would be huge for them and would give them the best chance of finishing second in that group. Decent chance for Australia as well, taking on Denmark, although they're the least fancy team to go through. And then this evening, Mexico, the least fancied team to go through from that group. They are Argentina are playing Poland, Mexico taking on Saudi Arabia. If the Saudis win that one, they will go through to the next phase. Argentina need to win as well to qualify. Poland just need a point, so everyone can still qualify from that group. Certainly, personally, I'm thinking if the Mexicans are still here, that's fantastic. They bring so much colour, so much cheer, so much costume to the event.
Paul, as ever, thank you for updating this in Doha. We'll see what emerges by the end of tonight with those other games. And we'll keep you updated, of course, on what the fans are doing as well. Plenty more to come here on GB News Live. We'll have what's been described as a game-changing breakthrough in Alzheimer's. Sir Jackie Stewart giving his reaction here on GB News. And another Mark White exclusive on the cross-channel migrants. All that coming up in a moment. First, a short break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. A member of the Buckingham Palace household has resigned and apologised after making unacceptable comments towards a guest at the Queen's consort reception last night. Ngozi Fulani, founder of a domestic abuse charity, says she was repeatedly asked where she really came from. Describing the conversation as a violation, she said the household member challenged her claims that she was born in the UK and was British. Buckingham Palace says all members of the household are being reminded of diversity and inclusivity policies. HSBC are going to close 114 bank branches across the UK as they say remote banking has soared in popularity. The banking giant says some of its stores have been serving less than 250 people a week following a decline in footfall since the pandemic. Use of its mobile app, however, has almost tripled since 2017. The bank plans, they say, to invest tens of millions of pounds in updating its remaining branches. There'll be 327 left after the closures next April. A major trial of an experimental Alzheimer drug has shown for the first time the early stages of the disease can be slowed. Scientists found after 18 months the drug stalled the disease progression by 27% compared with patients taking the placebo. However, experts warn as the medicine works during the initial stages of the disease, most won't benefit unless there's a revolution in spotting it. The results published in the New England Journal of Medicine have hailed it as the beginning of the end. The former Formula One champion, Sir Jackie Stewart, who runs a charity called Race Against Dementia, told GB News he thinks more can be done, but the new drug is a good start.
Whether it's been the medical world itself or whether it be the pharmaceutical industry, there just has not been enough put into it and investments, etc., to get where we are today. It's not going to cure people, as I understand it, at the present time, but it might make it more possible for those people who have it to have a better quality of life.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Prime Minister of being weak during a heated Prime Minister's questions this afternoon. Rishi Sunak came under fire from the opposition over private school funding, a failure, they say, to maintain house-building targets, and the latest inaction on a series of industrial strikes. Both party leaders also questioned each other over the support they had from their backbench MPs.
I've heard he's having a relaunch. Apparently it's called Operation Get Tough. So how tough is he going to get with his backbenchers who are blocking the new homes this country so badly needs?
Prime Minister! Mr. Speaker, we're delivering record numbers of new homes under this government. That's what we're doing. He talks about toughness, Mr. Speaker. He's too weak to stop dozens of his own MPs joining the picket lines.
Meanwhile, strikes affecting postal and education services are continuing today as industrial actions taking place across multiple unions. 150 universities and colleges have been impacted, and so has 77 sixth form colleges in England as National Education Union staff go on strike. Royal Mail staff start another two-day strike today. They're all in disputes over pay or conditions. Meanwhile, members of the Communication Workers Union are planning 7 more strikes next month in what the union's calling the biggest strike demonstration this country's ever seen on December the 9th. Ambulance workers across England are planning to strike before Christmas. It's part of a dispute over pay and staffing levels. Unison said thousands of 999 call handlers, ambulance technicians and paramedics will strike across the North, London, Yorkshire and the South West. The government says it's run out of prison places and has asked the police for the use of 400 cells to make up for the shortfall. The Prisons Minister, Damien Hinds, told MPs there had been an acute and sudden increase in the prison population in the recent months. He said Operation Safeguard, the government's contingency plan, had been activated. Mr Hinds said it was due in part to the Criminal Bar Association strike action over the summer, which led to a higher number of offenders on remand. The last time the plan was implemented was in 2007. Consumers are being warned of a shortage of British free-range turkeys. The British Poultry Council says half of the free-range turkeys being produced for the festive season in the UK have already been killed in the bird flu epidemic. The total number of turkeys produced for Christmas was around 8 to 9 million birds, but around 1 million have been culled or died from bird flu. You're up to date. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up this hour, the new breakthrough drug to slow the spread of Alzheimer's, attacking the disease in its early stages, will mark its significance with Alzheimer's Research UK. A royal racism row. Prince William's godmother resigns after comments to a black domestic abuse campaigner. She's called it a violation. Buckingham Palace has apologised. A new wave of strikes underway with postal workers, lecturers and college staff all walking out. Eurostar now joining the problems. 4 days of a walkout over the festive period. We're live at a rally where RMT union boss Mick Lynch has been speaking in the past few minutes. But first, let's tell you more about our exclusive report with Mark White, our Home Affairs editor, who's been following the latest findings of a boat on the coast with inner tube tyres found instead of the proper life-saving equipment and putting their lives at risk. This is his special report that he sent to us.
Adrift in the middle of the English Channel, a small migrant boat, its human cargo picked up by a border force vessel a short time earlier. It's not unusual to see these boats left abandoned in the middle of this busy shipping lane. The priority for authorities is to ensure the safety of those on board first. They'll often return for the boat later. But as we approach this vessel, the deeply alarming sight of dozens of tyre inner tubes inside. They were clearly being used as makeshift life jackets, but authorities warn they are absolutely no substitute for proper life preservers. On the other side of the channel, on a beach near Sangatte, more evidence that inner tubes are now being used. They're clearly visible inside this boat, which was intercepted by French police before it could get into the water. Walking away from the boat, this group of migrants, not one of them wearing a life jacket. Although there is evidence the French authorities are more active along these beaches, the long-suffering locals here are not optimistic this crisis will be over anytime soon.
It feels like things have been left as they were for years. It's been 30 years that Sangatte has been living to the rhythm of the refugee crisis.
Makeshift life preservers were often used a year or two ago when the people smuggling operations were less sophisticated. But these days the crime groups are much more organised and have well-sourced supply lines. Life jackets are normally standard issue on their illegal boat trips. The use of inner tubes once again could indicate a disruption in the supply chain, perhaps due to law enforcement activity. After a fortnight of bad weather, the small boats are back with a vengeance. 1,300 people have crossed in 24 inflatables in the past 2 days alone. Other sightings are being reported as the calm weather continues for at least another day. Mark White, GB News.
Well, Mark's just joining us in the studio now with the latest on this, because those boats spotted with the latest suggestion that, 1,300 crossing the channel in 24 boats, maybe just in these past 24 hours or so.
Yeah, and yesterday was a bumper day, 884 that crossed on a single day in 17 small boats. This was one of those small boats. And as I said in the VT there, it's not unusual that you would find these vessels adrift, even though it's a busy shipping lane. So clearly there's a potential hazard there. And people seeing a boat as well will call the Coast Guard thinking there might be people on board, which again causes more chaos potentially for the rescue services. But when they are so busy dealing with back-to-back calls, what they'll often do is take people off the boat, leave the boat adrift there, come back for it later, and that was one of these boats, Mark.
But, I mean, the indication that they're prepared to literally risk their lives with inner tubes, what does that indicate? Is it that there's growing desperation, or that the people smugglers who've been organising these boats are running out of the proper kit?
Well, this is the point. We don't really know, but we do know, Mark, that you had a situation about a year or two ago when the people smuggling operations across the Channel were still relatively in their infancy, and they didn't have the supply lines that were providing them with the likes of life jackets. So in the early days, they were using ad hoc ways of providing their version of a life preserver. It was an inner tube, it would be a block of polystyrene, something like that they would put on the boats. Now, of course, the people smuggling operations are very sophisticated, and they are supplied with thousands of life jackets on a regular basis for all those thousands that cross in the course of a week in very good weather. So this may indicate that there has been law enforcement activity. We've seen that before, Mark, where police have smashed a particular crime group and have been able to dismantle those supply lines. It stopped small boats coming across in the same sort of numbers. It may even disrupt things like the supply of life jackets.
Which is what, obviously, the UK authorities were hoping the French would do on their side of the Channel. However, in addition to this, we had Robert Jenrick indicating that the Home Office approach of the pushback, literally physically pushing the boats back, that is no longer being pursued. They've abandoned it.
Yeah, this was a policy introduced under Priti Patel when she was Home Secretary. Quite a few eyebrows raised at the time, really doubting that this could ever have been a viable policy. Yeah. And they tried it. They even went to the lengths of buying these jet skis that they would use, a number of jet skis, to try and push back individual boats. They carried out exercises in the middle of the Channel. But they came to the conclusion that there are very, very limited occasions when they would be able to use this tactic because there's a risk that you capsize the boat, that people jump in the water, and you then lead to a bigger tragedy. And it would have to be a fairly brave Border Force skipper that gives the go-ahead for that tactic to be used, knowing the risks.
Especially if they only had an inner tube to save themselves once they were in the sea.
Well, absolutely.
Now, what's the weather doing? Because you were indicating we've got this weather window, which indicates we may be seeing more boats in the next day or two.
Yes, we are in this this window at the moment of about 3 to 4 days of good flat calm weather. We've had pretty horrific weather for the last couple of weeks in the Channel. This time last year, actually, in November, it was a particularly good and calm November, and it was the busiest month of the year. It's not been the same this year, but we have got a couple of windows. This is one, and every time you see a window in between the storms, then you get a surge, and that's exactly what we're seeing. It's going to be good again tomorrow. Probably the last.
The weather, that is, not the situation. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, Mark, as ever, thank you, and of course we'll see what emerges in the days ahead. Thank you very much indeed. Now, to this drug which can slow the destruction of the brain in Alzheimer's, being heralded as a momentous breakthrough by scientists. The medicine, lecanemab, attacks a protein called beta-amyloid that builds up in the brains of those people with Alzheimer's. Well, currently they're given other drugs to help manage the symptoms, but none change the course of the disease itself. This new treatment is an antibody, such as those the body actually makes itself to attack viruses or bacteria. It tells the immune system to clear the amyloid protein from the brain. Well, the drug's been subjected to a large-scale trial and work in the early stages of the disease, so diagnosis is crucial for most sufferers not to miss out. Joining us now to explain the significance, David Thomas, Head of Policy at Alzheimer's Research UK. David, thanks for joining us here on GB News. I mean, is this the big breakthrough you've been looking for?
Yes, it is the big breakthrough that we've been looking for. So this is the first time that we've been able to demonstrate in a clinical trial that a treatment has slowed the course of Alzheimer's disease. There have been lots of other trials done over the last few decades, and we haven't seen that ability to shape the course of the disease. So it really is a big step forward, and I think will herald the development of a number of new treatments which are desperately needed by people living with dementia.
Yeah, now this is for early stages of the disease, we're told, attacking this protein. Does it also mean that you'll be able to adapt it or change it to cope with those who've got more advanced Alzheimer's?
That's right. So the trial was looking at people in the very early stages of the disease, And it's a lesson that we've seen from trials over the last few years, that the earlier you seem to be able to give this sort of treatment, the more effect it seems to have. I think there are other caveats with it. The impact it's had is quite modest in terms of the slowing of the disease. We're probably looking at months of additional time rather than years. And there are side effects which are associated by it. So I think there is more exploration that we need to understand how this drug will work over longer periods of time and what it will mean for people later in the course of the disease. But the proof of principle is there in terms of that you can alter the course of it.
OK, I mean, I understand one of the possible side effects could be brain bleeds, which obviously is something that you'll want to avoid. What sort of process now goes through before this can be introduced on a wider scale?
So the company who manufactures it, Eisai, will be putting it forward to regulators both in the US and also in Europe. And the regulators will need to make a decision based on this data about whether it's safe and effective. So that's a big question. And then once that is given a license in the UK, and that could take over a year, the NHS will need to determine whether the treatment is cost effective. And even after that decision is taken, we at Alzheimer's Research UK don't currently feel like the NHS is ready to actually roll out these medicines. It relies on a very accurate and early diagnosis, and that's not being routinely done within clinical care at the moment.
OK. David Thomas from Alzheimer's Research UK, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, let's reflect, of course, at actress Dame Barbara Windsor with, of course, her roles in the Carry On films, EastEnders and so on. She had Alzheimer's disease in her later years, dying just 2 years ago. Well, her husband, Scott Mitchell, an ambassador for Alzheimer's Research UK, and joins us now. Scott, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We spoke to Sir Jackie Stewart in this past hour, his wife, of course, suffering Lady Helen. I guess, as well as the medical breakthrough, this gives people hope because it's the families surrounding everyone else who's got Alzheimer's who are also suffering as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It gave me such a feeling of joy and hope this morning when I heard about this new treatment. Of course, as David has just said previously, of course, it's early stages and there's a long way to go. But what it did for me, it proved that research is the way forward. And that's what I campaign for, is awareness and funding. It's the worst thing in the world for any family member is to watch someone they love go through this disease. There's nothing to describe it. I don't think it's so prevalent now in our society. You know, 1 in 3 people born today will develop dementia. That's an incredible stat when you think about it. And it will affect the whole family. It's not just the person who gets the diagnosis. It is truly painful to sit by and watch, and you're pretty powerless a lot of the time to what you can do them.
Yeah, Stephen Kinnock talking about his mother Glenys Kinnock and indicating you grieve for someone who's still alive because they're no longer there, which is just terrible. But I mean, just in terms of the hope that these breakthroughs give, and I guess that you know that you're sharing now with everyone else that this is an international effort and things may start to get better now.
Well, that's exactly the thing. We now do have hope. There is now proof that there will be treatments that can actually slow this down, that can attack it at its core. And the more we go forward, the more trials that are done, the newer treatments that can be developed, trialed on people, getting into the system, we all can hope that one day they're going to eradicate this, or certainly slow it down to a point where people won't suffer as much once it does start progressing.
Yeah. And is it the case that for you and Sir Jackie Stewart, of course, that joining the campaign and getting the message out there, it helps you to actually cope with what you've been through?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the reason I am so passionate about it is because when I was in the real progressive stages of it with Barbara at home, I used to sit there and I used to talk to it in my head, and I used to say, look, you're bigger than me. I can't stop you doing what you're doing to my wife, to this lady that I love. But if there's any way that I can use her name and her legacy in the dementia world, which is very significant now.
Yeah.
Only this week, the government recommitted to the Dame Barbara Windsor Dementia Mission, which is going to be a task force that's been set up for dementia. And that will help speed up trials, get all the right people together, the NHS, all the specialists, all the pharmaceutical companies, to drive forward, and also the public as well, for us to take part in trials as well. So this is really significant what's happening, and it should give all of us a great deal of hope for the future.
Scott Mitchell, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that message here on GB News. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much. More, of course, on that, with that game-changing breakthrough, as they've called it. You're watching GB News Live. Coming up, food inflation hitting a record high again this month. Millions of UK households being plunged further into property. We'll get more with Liam Halligan on if there's any good news ahead. Before that, let's take a short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Welcome back. So a fresh wave of strikes being held today. Royal Mail workers and lecturers, college staff all walking out on the same day. It seems that the winter of discontent may be upon us. Security staff at Eurostar now adding that they'll be striking for 4 days in December, which could hit those international services. Meanwhile, General Secretary of the RMT, Mick Lynch, saying the government has shown a lack of urgency in dealing with the rail strikes. Let's speak now to Christian Woolmar, transport journalist and author. Christian, thanks for your time. We were getting the message from Mick Lynch just about a week or so ago that there may have been a sort of glimmer of hope that the government was taking this issue more seriously.
Yes, and then hope disappeared like a cloud in the sky. I'm still vaguely hopeful that they might bang their heads together and begin to sort this out. But, you know, nearly 6 months down into this, the unions have still not had an offer. And they've been without a pay rise for 3 years, and we can argue about the rights and wrongs of that, but that's their case. And on the other side, there's the government, which has for a long time refused to talk to the unions, refused to even recognise that the dispute is anything to do with them. And it's only recently that they began to recognise that actually they've got a role to play in this.
Yeah, Mark Harper was sort of saying pay rises could come if rail workers accepted reforms. But then there was this peculiar situation where Mick Lynch was indicating he wasn't quite sure if it was Mark Harper who was going to facilitate talks or whether they had to go back to each separate rail company and work out what was going to happen.
Well, it is slightly ridiculous because the rail companies no longer have, as it were, a balance sheet because they don't collect they collect the fares, but they pass them all on to the government. So they're operating on the basis that they get about 2% of the revenue, something like that, to manage the costs. But they don't make any money out of extra fares. So it's all down to the government, which is responsible for the whole financing of the industry. Of course, it's already responsible for Network Rail, which is essentially a state-owned company. So what are they playing at? I mean, I can understand they don't like ideologically to deal with the unions or have to kind of pay extra money or whatever, but it is their responsibility.
And on that note, we've got Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, meeting all the mayors today, particularly the northern mayors, on the performance of these companies, in particular Avanti West Coast, with, just cancellations, delays, and services really not up to scratch. And we're being told that quite often it's just literally rail workers who will no longer volunteer to do extra shifts. I mean, it's no way to run a railway, is it?
Well, you shouldn't be reliant on volunteers to work shifts. You should have deals by which there is a rota and they have to follow the rota. But what has happened over the years is that they relied on rail workers to cover shifts, particularly at weekends, on their off days. And now, as a kind of tacit form of industrial action, they're basically saying, no, we're not going to do this. And the rail companies have been completely stuck. But, I mean, you don't run your studio on the basis of saying, well, does anybody want to come in on Sunday? And if not, we'll just close it down. I mean, it's no way, as you say, to run a railroad.
Christian, as ever, thank you for that. And we'll see, of course, what emerges in that meeting with the mayors and, indeed, the talks with the various rail unions. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in our reporter, Ellie Costello, now live at King's Cross. Not just specifically with the rail unions there, Ellie, because, of course, it's the lecturers and others. And this is a rally of many unions, with many people, worried about a winter of discontent on the way.
Absolutely, Mark. It does seem to be that strike is the word of the season at the moment, and we've just seen the end of the largest rally ever of the University and Colleges Union. It's just finished here outside King's Cross Station. We'd say there are over 1,000 people here rallying for better pay, better conditions and better pensions. I'm not sure if this sign behind me is just being removed now. You can see they're packing up. But this is what they were here asking for: a fair pay deal, action on equality pay gaps, action on workloads and a better pension scheme. Over 1,000 people here. It really was like a carnival atmosphere. There was musical instruments, there were people here with their dogs, with their animals, all rallying for the same thing. We had Mick Lynch from the RMT. He was up on the stage rallying with the lecturers up and down the country, encouraging them to rally for better pay and better conditions. We know that there have been strikes on the railways throughout the summer. And then we heard also from Jo Grady, who is the General Secretary of the University and Colleges Union. She was here saying there should be power to the unions. Also, just speaking to me a moment ago, we will bring you that interview a little bit later on GB News, she confirmed there would be strike action in the new year if the universities do not listen to them and do not give them a better pay rise. They've already been offered 3%. She said that's unacceptable. They want something more in line with inflation. So we'll have to see how that goes. But earlier on, I spoke to some of the lecturers and students that have come from all over the UK to be here today, and I asked them why they had come. This is what they told me.
My salary is a very modest salary. You know, being a lecturer is by no means being a rich person. So, you know, if I have to keep thinking where I'm going to work next year, then I'm not going to be focusing on providing the best education for my students.
Workload has gone up so much over the last 10 years. We don't really have time for the students like we should have.
So it's also for student welfare because our working conditions are their learning conditions.
I'm on an okay salary. I'm not really here for myself. I'm totally fine, but I'm here for my casualised colleagues who get paid very, very little per hour. They're in very precarious situations. We want a sector where people have security in their work, security in their jobs, and they have the time to support students and support themselves to do the research that they need to progress in their careers and get out of those precarious situations.
Well, Mark, they also want to tackle this public misconception that lecturers earn a lot of money. Now, if you look at statistics, the average salary for a lecturer is about £38,000. A senior lecturer earns more like £60,000. But Jo Grady made the point when she was speaking to protesters that were here this afternoon that a third of academic staff are actually on temporary contracts, 0-hour contracts. And she said in this cost of living crisis, they are struggling to afford their rent. They don't know how they're going to pay for their rent in 3 months' time. So that is the message they were trying to convey today. A quick word from what the universities say. Well, they say that any increase in pay puts jobs at risk. And they also make the point that 30% of universities in the UK are already in debt. So it is a very serious conversation that is happening right now between lecturers and higher education staff and the universities that they work for. But Mark, the voices were very loud here this afternoon.
Indeed, the banner's being rolled, but the message loud and clear. Elliot, King's Cross from the moment. Thanks for updating us on that rally. More coming up, but latest on the World Cup from Doha. But first, let's get an update on the news headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. 2:33. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Buckingham Palace say a staff member's resigned and apologised after making unacceptable comments towards a guest at the Queen Consort's reception last night. Ngozi Fulani, the founder of a domestic abuse charity, says she was repeatedly asked where she really came from. Describing the conversation as a violation, she said the household member challenged her claims that she was born in the UK and was British. Buckingham Palace say all members of the household are being reminded of diversity and inclusivity policies. The government says it's run out of prison places and has asked the police for the use of 400 cells to make up for the shortfall. The Prisons Minister, Damien Hinds, told MPs there had been an acute and sudden increase in the prison population in the recent month. Mr Hinds said it was due in part to Criminal Bar Association strike action over the summer, which led to a higher number of offenders on remand. He said Operation Safeguard, it's the government's contingency plan, had been activated. HSBC will close 114 bank branches across the UK as remote banking soars in popularity. Well, HSBC says some of its stores have been serving less than 250 people a week, following a decline in football since the pandemic. The bank plans now to invest tens of millions of pounds in updating its remaining branches. There'll be 327 left after the closures next April. There's been an explosion at the Ukrainian embassy in Madrid. Spanish police say the blast injured an employee who opened a letter bomb. The staff member did not suffer serious injuries. Detectives are investigating the incident. A major trial of an experimental Alzheimer drug has shown for the first time the early stages of the disease can be slowed. Scientists found after 18 months the drug stalled the disease progression by 27% compared with patients taking a placebo. However, experts warn as the medicine works during the initial stages of the disease, most patients won't benefit unless there's a revolution in spotting it early. The results, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, have been hailed as the beginning of the end. We're on your TV, online, DAB+ radio. You're up to date on GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Now, perhaps you won't be surprised to learn, if you've been down the shops recently, the food prices have hit record levels again. New Office for National Statistics data showing a spike in the price of meat, eggs, dairy and coffee, all staples, of course, and that's driving up food inflation again, 12.4%, up from 11.6% in October, according to the British Retail Consortium. Poorer households, though, being hit even harder, with new research from the Centre of Social Justice suggesting some 7 million people having to pay more for their basic goods and services. Our GB News economics and business editor Liam Halligan now joining us in the studio with On the Money. So, Liam, as I was saying, many people have gone down the shops, won't be surprised to hear these figures. But, I mean, the problem is that these are real staples again, where it's just shooting up and up and up.
We've highlighted for months on GB News, Mark, haven't we, that inflation is higher than the headline numbers for poorer households, not least because poorer households spend disproportionately more of their income on fuel, food and other essentials that are more expensive than the basic rate of inflation. And, the Centre for Social Justice, this is a centre-right think tank that was set up by Ian Duncan Smith. We often highlight their work. They've brought out a report very recently, and it's called Over the Odds. And I've got some statistics here to show you. Now, they polled 4,000 British adults, and their research showed that poorer households face what they call a poverty premium. They pay more for basic goods than the rest of us, and these higher charges cost vulnerable families around £500 a year, £500 they can ill afford. And the statistics show, moving on, that 33% of these more vulnerable households, they are on energy prepayment meters.
Right.
Now, again, we've discussed this, haven't we? And you pay a lot more per unit energy when you're on a prepayment meter. You often have to go around the shops to put money in your account. And you pay more, even though you're a poorer family, you're not as creditworthy. That's why you're on the prepayment meter. And another statistic, over a fifth, Mark, 22% of our most vulnerable families, they can't afford household contents insurance, even though they tend to be in places where burglary is more prevalent. And finally, the CSJ say that 35% of these poor families, so that's over a third, use high-cost credit, payday and pawnbroking loans. So again, they pay more for their loans than you or I would, with respect. And then a fifth, 20%, they are digitally excluded. So it means they haven't got access to the internet in an easy way. They can't even shop around. We can often get bargains on the web, can't we? Because there's often more competition, and then they can't shop around for that either. So some valuable work there by the CSJ showing that not only is inflation higher for lower income families in general, food and fuel and so on, but accessing essential services like credit, like energy, is harder.
Yeah, and this time of year, of course, when they're trying to look at what to do for Christmas, it really is a desperate situation. However, is there a bit of light at the end of the tunnel? Hugh Pill, the chief economist of the Bank of England, has been talking, and he, like you, has indicated, well, look, inflation may start coming down. I mean, it's going to be painful because it's the recession that's squeezing the economy, but we may see that figure coming down into the spring and summer of next year.
There's a lot of this kind of what we call economic discourse going on in the background, and sometimes it bursts through into the mainstream news. Yesterday, in the House of Lords Select Committee, there was a gargantuan tussle, all very polite, between Andrew Bailey, the current Governor of the Bank of England, and Mervyn King, who was the Governor of the Bank of England some time ago, before Mark Carney. And they were talking about when inflation might come down and whether or not the Bank of England should have raised interest rates earlier. And I certainly think it should have done, as I've said on GB News many times. And as you say, Hugh Pill, who's the chief economist of the Bank of England, pretty much the number 2, he gave a speech in London today, and he said high inflation will stay with us for some time, but by the middle of next year, so just over 6 months, he then thinks inflation will, quote, be falling rapidly.
Right.
So that is some light at the end of the tunnel. Inflation, of course, is the term we use to capture cost of living increases, and inflation, the headline inflation rate, is currently at a 41-year high.
Yeah, and higher, as you say, effectively for these poorer families, and one wonders what damage it's being done to them before those figures start to come down. But, Liam, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, we'll be reflecting on all those figures as they come through, giving a snapshot of the economy. But let's move to royal matters now, with a senior member of the royal household resigning after she asked a prominent black campaigner where she really came from. Ngozi Fulani, a campaigner for survivors of domestic abuse, said the comments to her were a violation that will never leave me. Well, the palace has called the incident deeply regrettable and unacceptable. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker joins us now live from Boston in the United States. And Cameron, of course, this is where the Prince and Princess of Wales are going to make this Earthshot Prize giving, and it's a high-profile event. The significance of these remarks coming, we believe, from Prince William's godmother, Lady Sarah Hussey.
Yeah, a huge distraction for Prince William's Earthshot Prize this week, and causing a huge headache for the royal household. These are very, very serious allegations, let's not forget. A member of the royal household has been accused of asking a black domestic abuse campaigner where she really came from, as you said, Mark. Now, Buckingham Palace are refusing to say who this member of the royal household is, who has now quit, but media are widely reporting that it is Lady Sarah Hussey, who is Prince William's godmother. Now, Buckingham Palace were very, very quick, actually, unusually quick, to release a statement following these allegations, which were made public on Twitter. They said, "We take the incident extremely seriously and have investigated immediately to establish the full details. In this instance, unacceptable and deeply regrettable comments have been made. We have reached out to Ngozi Fulani on this matter and are inviting her to discuss all elements of her experience in person if she wishes." Now, a spokesperson at Buckingham Palace goes on to say, in the meantime, the individual concerned would like to express her profound apologies for the hurt caused and has stepped aside from her honorary role with immediate effect. All members of the household are being reminded of the diversity and inclusivity policies which they are required to uphold at all times. Now, inevitably, memories go back to the Oprah interview of 2021 with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, where Meghan accused an unnamed member of the royal family of racism by questioning what colour Archie's skin would be when she was born. It's just yet another royal racism row, but I think Prince William and Princess Catherine, when they arrive in Boston today, of course, it's the first visit for them as Prince and Princess of Wales, are very much going to be focused on Earthshot and trying to create a positive image of the royal family abroad, especially in the United States, who are, quite frankly, obsessed with the British royal family.
And just to remind people, this Earthshot Prize has been described by Royal Aid, I think, as the Prince's Super Bowl moment. This is a big deal.
Yeah, Super Bowl moment, exactly. It's his big deal, having a global leadership on the world stage in terms of climate change, and it's all about having a positive impact on the environment rather than doom and gloom scaremongering. So here is my report.
How do you turn seaweed into edible shots?
Cheers.
Cheers. This week, British start-up Notbla, as in Not Plastic, is up for a £1 million reward from Prince William's Earthshot Prize. Revive Our Oceans is one of the categories, and the company successfully reduces the need for ocean-clogging plastic by turning seaweed into biodegradable containers. Containers that you can eat.
There's nothing that nature cannot deal with.
The company's co-founder, Pierre Paslier, believes having Prince William on board will help find alternatives to harmful plastic.
Having the Earthshot Prize support solutions like ourselves is huge, because the industry is still very backward thinking. People don't really think out of the box. Everyone thinks that the only solution is recycling, whereas we've spent 50 years kind of like proving that actually it's not going to get us out of this problem.
It's all about urgent optimism. Instead of what some would see as doom and gloom scaremongering, Earthshot is instead about celebrating genuine solutions that could repair our planet. Dubbed his Super Bowl moment, the Prince will be joined in Boston by a long list of A-listers, including singer Billie Eilish and Hollywood actor Rami Malek. The Waleses are keen to spend extra time in the city too, supporting the most hard-pressed communities and showcasing a Boston that cares for the climate. It's their Royal Highnesses' first international visit since taking on their new roles, but royal aides insist it's not a traditional royal tour. Instead, Earthshot is the big focus, and those close to Will and Kate are determined not to get distracted by another royal couple living in California. The Prince and Princess made a point of visiting one of last year's winners, Coral Vita, in the Bahamas earlier this year. Sam Teicher, who co-founded the company to restore the world's dying coral reefs, has first-hand experience working with the couple.
They are really passionate about protecting the planet, leaving a legacy behind that not only the natural world but humanity can benefit from, and are pretty phenomenal freedivers, I gotta say. And they didn't want to stop planting corals. It was a shame they had a flight to catch, because I don't think they wanted to get out of the water.
On Friday, the second annual Earthshot Prize Awards will happen at the MGM Music Hall in Boston. The ceremony will be broadcast globally on Sunday. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, I'm in Boston for Prince William's Earthshot Prize, and it's the birthplace of John F. Kennedy, who created Moonshot, all about meeting the seemingly impossible task to put a man on the moon. Prince William was inspired by that to create Earthshot, trying to meet the seemingly impossible task to solve climate change and repair our planet. Now, away from Earthshot, they're also going to be undertaking a number of other engagements. Princess Catherine is going to be focusing on early childhood. They're both going to be visiting some deprived communities within Boston, but I think it's all about increasing their influence and popularity on the world stage, particularly around championing solutions to climate change. So more on that all this week.
OK, and just very quickly, no plans to meet the Duke or Duchess of Sussex?
No plans to meet the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but there perhaps is a plan to meet the President of the United States, Joe Biden. That's expected to happen on Friday, but final details have not been confirmed yet.
OK, keep us updated on that. Cameron, with the skyline of Boston behind you, thanks for updating us there. Prime Minister's questions a little earlier saw Labour leaders Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak trade blows over private school funding, home ownership aspirations and Sir Keir even offering Labour votes to help defeat a growing planning rebellion faced by the Prime Minister. Let's remind you of the key moments from earlier today.
Winchester College has a rowing club, a rifle club, an extensive art collection. They charge over £45,000 a year in fees. Why did he hand them nearly £6 million of taxpayers' money this year in what his Levelling Up Secretary calls egregious state support?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased he wants to talk about schools, because we recently announced billions more funding for our schools. We're helping millions of the most disadvantaged children catch up with their lost learning. And we're driving up school standards, Mr. Speaker. But during COVID, he wanted to keep schools closed. We shouldn't be surprised, because I listen to parents and he listens to his union paymasters.
And he talks about aspiration. Mr. Speaker, they are killing off aspiration in this country, and it's not just education. Why is the dream of home ownership far more remote now than it was when his party came into power 12 years ago?
What have we done in those 12 years? The highest number of new homes started in 15 years. Largest number of first-time buyers in 20 years. He talked about 10 years ago. What do we inherit? The lowest level of house building in a century.
I've heard he's having a relaunch. Apparently, it's called Operation Get Tough. So how tough is he going to get with his backbenchers who are blocking the new homes this country so badly needs?
He talks about toughness, Mr. Speaker. He's too weak to stop dozens of his own MPs joining the picket lines. So what, if he wants to support those hard-working families and show some leadership, why doesn't he confirm right now that no Labour MPs are going to join those picket lines?
If he wants to defeat that amendment from his anti-growth backbenchers on national targets for housing, Labour will lend him the votes to do so. Country before party, that's the Labour way. Why doesn't he try it?
I think we did hear too weak to confirm no one on the picket line. But Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Labour ideas: more debt, more inflation, more strikes and more migration. He tells his party what they want to hear. I'll take the difficult decisions for this country, and that's the choice, Mr. Speaker. It's the politics of yesterday with him or the future of the country with me.
Let's get more with our political reporter, Olivia Utley, joining us from Westminster. And Olivia, that offer of the Labour votes indicating, of course, the difficulties that Rishi Sunak's had in his own backbenchers with this particular problem of housing.
Yes, it was a very clever move from Starmer because it puts Sunak right on the back foot by saying that he would help the Conservative government get through the Levelling Up bill. He puts Rishi Sunak in a very difficult situation because Sunak obviously wants to get through that bill, but doing it through borrowed votes from the opposition makes him look very weak. And that weakness is something which Keir Starmer is going to keep on mentioning. After a few weeks of not quite being able to work out Rishi Sunak's weakness, it feels as though Starmer now has managed it. And what that weakness is weakness itself. He's going to keep on making a point of how the Conservative backbenchers behind the Prime Minister don't fully support him on housing. It's one instance. The other thing which Starmer has managed to hammer home is this wealth problem. For a while now, Labour has been trying to capitalise on Rishi Sunak's extreme wealth, but it hasn't really been hitting home. In talking about private schools today, it feels as though Starmer has managed to find a way to leverage the Prime Minister's wealth against him. And it's quite interesting because it does show that Keir Starmer has got his confidence back. The Daily Mail have accused Keir Starmer of fighting a class war about private schools, but Keir Starmer is prepared to take them on and is arguing that giving tax breaks to private schools is an anti-aspiration policy. Now, that actually might play quite well with the sort of Middle England voters that Starmer needs to win over, because although they might want to send their children to private schools, private school fees have increased astronomically, totally out of line with inflation over the last 30 years. So it really does seem to be the very richest sending their children to private schools now. So that line could actually play pretty well with the country.
Yes, there was this sort of whiff of class war, wasn't there? This mention of the rifle ranges of Winchester College. But interesting that Sunak then was firing back on the whole issue of the picket lines and, of course, strike action and this growing winter of discontent.
Yes, and that certainly is the weakness in Keir Starmer's armour. There are plenty of Labour MPs who would very much like to be joining some of those strikers on the picket lines. And Sunak knows that Starmer isn't able to, remove the whip from Labour MPs who want to do that. Angela Rayner did it a couple of months ago, Starmer's deputy. So it's not quite possible for Starmer just to get rid of anyone who's backing the strikers, and it would make life very difficult for him with his trade union supporters as well. So certainly Starmer has a problem with his backbenchers and Sunak has a problem with his backbenchers, and they're both going to keep using that against each other.
Olivia at Westminster, thanks very much for updating us there. Well, let's head from the sunshine of Westminster to the sunshine of Doha and get the very latest on the World Cup and speak to our news correspondent Paul Hawkins, who's there for us as ever. Paul, we've got more games on the way, Tunisia and France, and also the Socceroos, Australia in action. But France, of course, we reflect, one of the fancy teams to go all the way.
Yeah, absolutely. France will be one of the teams to watch, and Kylian Mbappe, their striker, looking like he deserves the title of one of the world's best players. Certainly if England meet Kylian Mbappe, I'd hate to see him up against Harry Maguire. That's giving me nightmares, to be honest. But let's not think about that. That's who England may face should they beat Senegal on Sunday. And Senegal are by no means going to be any sort of pushovers. They're currently the African champions. Many of their players play in the Premier League and around some of Europe's best leagues. They'll be a very physical, very technical side and a real challenge for England when they face them after beating the Welsh 3-0 last night. A deserved result, one would say. Great individual performances from Marcus Rashford and Phil Foden, and that's why England fans are feeling fairly confident today. The morning after, how are you feeling?
Relieved.
That's an interesting word you used. Why relieved?
After the American game, we were useless, absolutely useless, and the Americans deserve to win that. And then you think what team's going to turn up against the Welsh, and you got the rivalry and everything. So just to get the 3-0 win was amazing. It's very similar to the USA game. I mean, we played it too safe. There was no sort of creativity. We weren't trying to get the balls in behind or anything like that, or open. So we just ended up playing far too safe for what we could have done. What we saw in the Iran game, where we were exciting and scoring goals and creating chances. So yeah.
And Paul, has there been a reassessment now of how far England could go with the fact that Rashford seems to be firing on all cylinders again? And, of course, we've got Foden in the mix at long last.
Yeah, there has been, because Gareth Southgate made those changes yesterday and England looked more positive, although you have to say the first half against Wales last night was awful. When you say there's a reassessment, it feels like there's a reassessment after every game. It's coming home after you beat Iran 6-2, then it's not coming home after you draw 0-0 with the USA, then you beat Wales 3-0, and it is coming home. It almost feels like you're on this kind of schizophrenic journey as an England fan. But Senegal will be a decent test. We'll get a better measure of how England can perform once we see them on Sunday night. In terms of the games right now, in fact, the noise you can hear at the moment, that is the Polish fans, because Poland are playing Argentina later and they only need a point to reach the next round. So that's how that's happening. Argentina, if they win that game, will qualify for the next round. Mexico are playing Saudi Arabia. Should the Saudis win, they'll qualify for the knockout stage. And then later on, and then straight up in just a moment, as you mentioned, we've got Australia against Denmark and France against Tunisia. That'll be a good one. The French have already qualified.
And you won't be coming home quite yet, at least until after Sunday, we hope. We shall see what happens with Senegal. For the moment, Paul, with a very noisy Doha souk behind you, thank you very much indeed. Paul, as ever, updating us with all the action in the World Cup. We'll update you once more tomorrow from 12 to 3 and all the news. But we've got Patrick coming up with all the latest for you until 6. Before that, let's take a short break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life.